I'm the highest civilization in the universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 476, Camilla wanders in the free zone. According to Li Ming's understanding, he would not be audited if he left the central system. What was going on with Star? He couldn't figure it out, but he didn't want to cause trouble. Li Ming pointed at the console and agreed to accept the audit. Of course, although Li Ming accepted the audit, he didn't want to show his current identity. After all, except for the Cheyenne Guard, other forces still thought that Li Ming was a person with easy energy. Thinking of this, Li Ming used Pan Lang to collect his energy to the first interval state, and then transformed his appearance into the ordered reappearance of aliens from the Andromeda Galaxy. As long as he could fool around quickly and leave quickly, Li Ming would be satisfied, so this transformation was still necessary. The spacecraft approached Star, and then the system was connected to the system of the planet. Li Ming just waited on the spacecraft with a calm expression. After a while, the spacecraft teleported by itself and officially entered Star. Star is a planet with a diverse and complex environment. There are high mountains and steep hills, wilderness plains, and rivers and seas. The distribution is relatively even and there is not much difference. After reaching advanced civilization, with the contact with advanced equipment and means of ability, the planet began to become small. This smallness is not a comparison of real volume, but a change in the heart and the universe. Simply put, a person may feel far away when walking dozens of kilometers, but with transportation, this feeling disappears. The improvement of personal civilization level is this concept. With the strength of the heart and the teleportation spacecraft, the shuttle between planets and galaxies begins to become as simple as visiting. On a plane on the Star, the hard rock land is covered with buildings. The buildings here are of various types and styles, but buildings are buildings after all. No matter how the appearance changes, they are all personal spaces. Although the buildings are different, the planning order is well organized. Aircraft and various vehicles are shuttling back and forth on their own orbits, and there is no feeling of chaos. At the edge of the building area is a small military base, where there are alien soldiers in uniform, as well as various weapons and equipment, and building facilities, that are only available in military areas. The open space next to the small base is the spacecraft parking area. Under the arrangement of the other party, Li Ming's spacecraft was parked at a height of more than 10 meters. The spaceship stopped steadily, and a blue beam of light shone down. Li Ming's figure fell from it little by little. At this moment, Li Ming had transformed into an alien, not a human, and looked a little strange. As soon as Li Ming's feet landed on the ground, more than a dozen alien soldiers immediately surrounded him. These soldiers were wearing black armor and holding weapons, but they just surrounded him, and did not look like they were going to fight. The leader was an officer of a 1.2 level civilization, short and fat, with long ears, named Harding. Li Ming's eyes just glanced, and the information he wanted entered his mind. Harding looked at Li Ming, and after sensing Li Ming's 1.3 level civilization, his face changed slightly, but soon returned to calm, and his face also revealed a look of disdain, saying, "Which galaxy are you from? What are you doing out of here?" Li Ming paused after hearing this, and glanced casually. After confirming Harding's galaxy, he directly said, "Kiris Galaxy." Oh. Harding was shocked. After all, the galaxy Li Ming was talking about was the galaxy where Harding's mother star was located. Li Ming continued, "It is not convenient to disclose my mission this time. You'd better not waste my time." Hearing this, Harding chuckled, snorted, and said, "It is not convenient to disclose. Well, then send it to the Camilla free zone. When it is convenient to disclose it, come to me again." As he said this, several soldiers next to him approached and looked as if they were going to take Li Ming away. Li Ming narrowed his eyes and looked at Harding. More information entered his mind, but at this moment, Li Ming did not mean to resist. He looked at the soldiers next to him and left. Through his wisdom ability, Li Ming found out from Harding's mind that the reason why the review of the critical point became very strict was because of the order from the Andromeda Galaxy headquarters, Wizard and Hades. The investigation of each critical point was only to find one person, that is, Li Ming. Those who could not prove their identity would be temporarily wandered to the free zone of the critical point and released after their identity was verified. The Andromeda Galaxy's top management knew about Li Ming's ability to transform because Li Ming had used this ability when he saved Gabby, so those who could not distinguish their identities were put aside for the time being, waiting for the top management to check one by one. This is also the reason why Li Ming did not resist. However, the wandering free zone is not a prison, but a truly free zone. There are also buildings and facilities in the free zone, and even complete living conditions, including trading halls. However, if you want to get a better living environment in the free zone, you have to pay a certain amount of energy, otherwise you can only live in seclusion in the mountains. Li Ming, who saw this information, was not in a hurry to leave Ilamastar. Everything can only be decided by the situation. Several soldiers drove the aircraft to take Li Ming to a building area farther away. If the building area that Li Ming saw before was already very messy, then this building area was even more unbearable to look at. The building area here is divided into two areas. One is a building area with a mixed structure of rock and metal, which is disorderly and messy, and the other is like a slum, simple and very dirty. There are also mountain areas in the distance of these two construction areas, but they are all in a huge barrier. Simply put, it is to use the induction barrier technology to divide an area on the Ilamastar for the use of vagrants. This area is also not small, equivalent to a large country on Earth. Li Ming, who arrived for the first time, was sent directly to the construction area. The soldiers just threw Li Ming into an open space and left directly. Li Ming didn't care. He glanced at the construction area with his eyes and then walked in. After understanding the rules here, Li Ming became familiar with it, as if he had lived here before. The streets in the construction area were bustling with people coming and going, all of whom were strange aliens. These aliens are generally of higher levels, and the lowest is also a first level civilization, but these people are basically the same as Li Ming, belonging to vagrants, and their identities cannot be confirmed. Entering the street, Li Ming shuttled through the crowd, and the people here were busy making a living. With a pair of wise eyes, the information in the minds of these pedestrians was constantly being mastered by Li Ming. To survive, you must have energy, just like eating, which is the basis of life supply. However, the entire Ilama planet is a planet with scarce resources. If you don't have enough energy to survive in the Camilla free zone, it is basically difficult to maintain life. The cost of living here is high, and long-term survival faces great challenges. Once you can't afford the cost of living, you can only live on the streets, or enter the dirty and messy slums. Of course, if you have any high-value items, you can go to the trading hall to exchange some energy, or directly sell yourself to the management here, and do hard labor in the mines. This kind of life is worse than going to prison, but this is the rule here, because the people here basically can't tell their origins and purposes, and they are people who can't be trusted. Li Ming looked around, and came to the deeper part of the building. The closer to the center, the larger the scale of the building, and various facilities are revealed. The buildings that provide living, or the trading hall, have a much larger flow of people coming and going than the periphery. Li Ming's eyes quickly locked onto a trading hall. The trading hall here was relatively simple, just a huge spherical building. The door was not a portal, and Li Ming was not quite sure what the trading model here was. Looking at the people coming in and out of the trading hall, Li Ming walked over. As soon as he entered the hall, a dark atmosphere came from all around. There were not many people in the hall, and there was no trading equipment that Li Ming had seen before. There was only a window at the end of the hall, and an alien was sitting inside, looking smug and contented. After Li Ming's eyes glanced over there, he saw several aliens queuing up. He glanced at them, frowned slightly, and understood immediately. Chapter 477, Elves. Li Ming's previous transactions were all systematic equipment, just like shopping on Taobao, and even selling items was very convenient, but it was different here. There was no such equipment, and the value of all items was determined by the manager of the trading hall. Obviously, the transactions here must be unfair. While watching, he slowly approached, looking at the window with his eyes, and walked over. At this time, an alien in front of Li Ming was holding a metal box in his hand, his head lowered, looking at the metal ball with a sad face, all hesitant. Li Ming stood quietly behind him, and his thoughts were all seen by Li Ming without reservation. The person in front of him was preparing to trade a more valuable item of his race in exchange for energy to maintain his livelihood, but this thing was closely related to the entire race, so this person was hesitant. Just as the other party was hesitating, the few people in front of him had completed the transaction and left a distance, but this person still hesitated to come forward. Are you going to trade or not? Don't block the road, okay? The person behind Li Ming seemed to say anxiously. Li Ming's eyes turned to the corners of his eyes, not paying attention, while the alien in front of Li Ming frowned, as if he was suddenly awakened. He ignored the voice behind him, took a step, and slowly came to the window. But after reaching the window, this person looked at the item in his hand, and was still reluctant. This kind of people who have not decided whether to trade come to line up, which will indeed delay the time of the people behind, and Li Ming naturally doesn't like it, but Li Ming is somewhat interested in the item in his hand. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his wisdom eyes activated, intending to sense the item. But just when Li Ming was about to see what was going on, this person suddenly sighed slightly, turned around and left, and did not continue the transaction. This person did not go far. After coming to the rest area in the hall, he sat in a daze. Li Ming glanced at the other party, and then came to the window. Li Ming is not here to exchange items for energy, because Li Ming has too much energy in his body, and he can't use it up at all. The purpose of Li Ming's coming here is to see if there are any items that Li Ming needs here in exchange for some. Simply put, others come to sell things because of their difficult lives, while Li Ming comes to buy. After standing at the window for a while, Li Ming began to talk with the person inside. After confirming Li Ming's purpose of coming here, the alien in the window was also extremely enthusiastic, as if he had seen a big customer. After talking for a while, the alien in the window took out a stationary disc and handed it to Li Ming. The disc is a technological device, only the size of a palm. After Li Ming received it, he smiled slightly and left, turning around and preparing to leave the trading hall. But just after taking a few steps, Li Ming's eyes looked at the alien sitting in the rest area before. This person is called Grove, belonging to the middle system of the Andromeda galaxy, and his mother star is located in the burning spirit star of the Yuchan star system. These are the information Li Ming obtained from his consciousness. As for the items in his hand, they have a lot to do with his galaxy. Grove's race belongs to biological civilization, but his race is very rare. It is the elf race. This word seems a bit magical, but there is indeed such a kind of life among the many life forms in the universe. Every creature on their planet has spirituality. Not only aliens, but also animals and plants have spiritual perception that humans cannot understand. The elves belong to the beast-taming tribe of biological civilization. It is rare to have such a single tribe on a planet. As for the item in Grove's hand, Li Ming has already found out that it is an energy stone, not an ore, but a rock of pure energy. It cannot be said to be very precious, but it is not very common. Energy stones are items higher than energy ores. Generally, there is a chance to encounter them when mining. There is not much difference between their essence and other energy ores. The only difference is that the energy content inside must be high. Originally, Li Ming thought that the thing in the other party's hand was a rare treasure, but after seeing that it was an energy stone, Li Ming was still a little disappointed. He shook his head slightly and prepared to leave. But just as he was about to leave, Li Ming's figure suddenly paused. After looking at the other party again, he came to Grove's side again. Li Ming didn't see anything that attracted him, but he felt pity for Grove's current state, so he intended to help him. How do you plan to sell the thing in your hand? Li Ming's voice immediately entered the other party's ears. Because the distance was very close and there were no other aliens around, Grove was suddenly stunned. He looked around and finally looked at Li Ming. He shrank his body slightly and immediately clenched the metal ball in his hand. He said with a cautious look, "You, who are you?" Li Ming smiled slightly and said, "You name a price and I'll buy it." Grove looked puzzled. After hesitating for a moment, he suddenly said, "Who said I wanted to sell it? I didn't plan to sell it." "Oh. Li Ming smiled slightly, looked at the other party again, and said, "If you don't want to trade, then what are you doing here?" Grove paused, looked at the thing in his hand, hesitated again, and said, "Who are you? Whether I want to sell this thing or not is none of your business." These words startled Li Ming. His face changed slightly, and he felt a little angry in his heart. He couldn't help but think of a saying, "There must be something hateful about pitiful people," but after thinking about it again, Li Ming seemed to have figured out some truths. Although he saw through the other party's thoughts, the other party didn't know that he was a stranger, so it was normal for Grove to be wary. It was just that he was too hasty. Thinking of this, Li Ming sighed, flipped his right hand, took out a star bag, and then threw it to the other party. Without saying a word, he turned around and prepared to leave. Wait. Li Ming had just taken a few steps when the other party called Li Ming again. Li Ming stood still, glanced back, and continued to walk away quickly. After leaving the trading hall, Li Ming looked around and locked onto a tall square building. The building was a place for living. Compared with the trading hall, there were fewer people coming and going at the door of this square building. Li Ming looked at it and walked over quickly. A distance of several hundred meters was reached in a blink of an eye, but after reaching the door, Li Ming did not enter, but stopped where he was, turned around, looked behind him, and saw that Grove had followed him. Li Ming narrowed his eyes and looked at the other party, still motionless. However, Grove saw that he was discovered by Li Ming, so he stopped hiding and walked a few steps to Li Ming. Without waiting for the other party to speak, Li Ming raised his hand and signaled the other party not to speak, and he said, "If you have anything to say, let's talk inside." As soon as the voice fell, Li Ming took the lead to walk into the building. The door of the square building is a spacious blue portal. Li Ming was in front and Grove was behind. The two of them flashed into the portal and came to a hall when they appeared again. The hall is square, 100 meters long and wide, as spacious as a square, with no one in the middle, but there are 4 service desks in the 4 corners of the hall, and there is no one here. Li Ming's eyes turned and came to one of the service desks. He stretched out his hand and clicked. The blue light flashed on the table, and various information immediately emerged. Li Ming clicked again and immediately found the rules for living charges here. In front of the service desk is a place to pay energy. After paying, you will get the portal instruction and enter your residence through the portal. You can also choose to preview the residence. As Li Ming's fingers moved, the originally empty hall suddenly flashed with red light and woven a pattern. The pattern was a preview of a residence 3D perspective, a full view of the location, configuration and other information of your residence. At this glance, Li Ming understood that these comfortable, independent, and large residences were not in the construction area, but were built separately in another area, which might be a mountain or somewhere else. Independent and well equipped, but expensive, Li Ming carefully selected one, smiled with satisfaction, flipped his right hand, took out a star bag, and threw it on the service desk. Chapter 478 Golden Fragments. A flash of blue light, the star bag disappeared, and then the red light pattern in the middle of the hall also turned into a red portal with a humming sound. Li Ming smiled lightly and walked directly over. Grove paused, but soon followed Li Ming. After passing through the portal, his figure flashed, and Li Ming came to a wide space, surrounded by cave walls. There was a big door in the distance, obviously in the cave, and here was just the gate of Li Ming's rental place. After taking a look at the gate, Li Ming walked over quickly, and Grove behind him was still following closely. His eyes kept looking around. When he came to the gate, he lightly tapped his fingers, and the gate opened with a humming sound. The gate here was a purely mechanical gate, as if it was a piece of metal plate. Before entering, just standing at the door and looking, Li Ming showed a light smile. The lights and walls inside were brilliant, and various energy ornaments flashed bright light, just like the gold and silver jewelry of rich people. Not only was the energy aura dignified, but the appearance was also very gorgeous and beautiful. It seems that the energy was not paid in vain. As he said this, Li Ming's face was full of satisfied smiles. Grove also looked around curiously. As a first-level civilization, he seemed to have never lived in such a luxurious place. What was in front of him was just the living room. There were multiple portals around, which were other small rooms. Li Ming did not check it carefully because he had already understood the layout of this place when he chose this place. He turned around and sat down in front of the meteorite table in the living room and waved his hand to signal the other party to sit down as well. Grove was not polite and sat opposite Li Ming. Li Ming immediately smiled and said, "Follow me. If you have anything to say, you can talk now." Grove was immersed in it after hearing this. After hesitating for a while, he took out the metal box and said, "I plan to consign this thing to you, but I will definitely exchange it back." "Oh." Li Ming looked indifferent. After nodding slightly, he said, "Then I have to see what you have now." The so-called consignment is like a pawn shop. It is just temporarily trading things into energy and exchanging them back within a certain period of time. However, this behavior is generally only suitable for cruise bay or some formal large institutions. Grove continued to look at the thing in his hand. After hesitating for a while, he pushed the metal box in front of Li Ming with both hands. Li Ming's wisdom eyes had already seen the things in the box, but now he still pretended not to know and raised his hand to take the metal box in his hand. A blue light flashed in his hand, and the light of the metal box faded away, and a small piece of golden stone appeared in his hand. As soon as he saw this object, Li Ming's eyes suddenly widened a little. This golden object is very small. It is not a triangle, but it has 3 sides. One side is a smooth arc, and the other 2 sides are irregular jagged edges. But as long as you look at the whole, it is one of the fragments of an object. Obviously, this golden object should have been a round palm-sized object, but it has been broken, and what Li Ming is holding in his hand is one of the fragments. But the material of this object has not changed. It is still the energy stone that Li Ming sensed before. Maybe this is why this object is easier to break. It is indeed not of much value in itself, but a closer look still deeply attracted Li Ming. Although it is only a part of the fragment, the tiny characters on it still completely attracted Li Ming's attention. Li Ming did not recognize these alien characters, and it might take some time to identify them, but Li Ming was impressed by the appearance of these characters, and he had seen them more than once. Things from the inner Earth civilization? Li Ming was secretly shocked. The geocentric civilization has always been a mysterious civilization. Like the aerospace civilization, it is full of unknowns. The reason why Li Ming can associate these two civilizations is mainly because of some of the strange laws. In Li Ming's cognition, he has never seen the life of the geocentric civilization. All the information related to it comes from various relics, but one thing is certain, the items left by this civilization must be high-level items, such as the Shanhei Hingai Shang on Li Ming. As for the aerospace civilization, Li Ming met 2 people. One is Big Zhu, who has the artifact Yanhei Huan Meng, and the other is the girl rescued by Li Ming, Tanjing. But Li Ming knows nothing about the historical origin and ability information of the aerospace civilization. A geocentric civilization with only relics and an aerospace civilization with only life are both strange civilizations. Looking at the golden fragment in his hand, Li Ming's heart is still a little turbulent. Although it was just a fragment, since it was an item from the Earth's inner civilization, Li Ming was still very interested in it. Thinking so in his heart, there was not much strangeness on his face. He turned his eyes to Grove and said, "This item itself has no value, but if you can tell me where it came from, it may still have some value." For Grove, this item was indeed not very valuable, but he was hesitant and was thinking about something in his mind. After a while, Grove said, "This item was found on our burning spirit star. Because there are some characters on it, we plan to send it to the outer system to sell it." "Send it to the outer system to sell it?" Li Ming's face changed, and he said in astonishment. Grove nodded slightly, hesitated for a while, and then continued, "To be honest, this item was intended to be sold to the Jinno civilization, and they also offered a very high price, but I didn't expect that I would be detained when I passed this critical point." Grove suddenly stopped here and didn't say anything, but Li Ming's slightly narrowed eyes had already seen the reason. The Jinno civilization is the enemy of the Andromeda galaxy and no one is allowed to contact it. Grove actually wanted to trade with the Jinno civilization. This kind of thing naturally cannot be told to others, so he had to keep silent during the review of the Irama star. This detention made Grove stay in the Camilla free zone for a month. The cost of living in the Camilla-free zone is very high, which made Grove not only unable to complete the transaction, but also made survival a dilemma. That's why he had the idea of consigning the golden fragments. Grove looked up at Li Ming and said, "Now I just want to exchange some energy, and then find a way to leave here." Li Ming looked at the other party, and sometimes looked at the golden fragments in his hand. He didn't say a word, but Li Ming knew the root of the matter very well. Exchanging energy has always been a regular trade on the burning spirit star. Because the resources on this star are very scarce, and the Jinno civilization is willing to trade at a high price, Grove still has to trade with the Jinno civilization as much as possible, so he had the idea of consignment. Li Ming looked at him, smiled lightly, and said, "How did you negotiate with the Jinno civilization?" Grove hesitated again, sighed slightly, and said, "We agreed to meet in the outer system, but now it seems impossible. I have communicated with the Jinno civilization many times through the equipment on my body, hoping that they can take the risk to come to Ilamastar to trade, but they have not responded, so I'm also a little worried." Li Ming nodded slightly, looked at the fragments in his hand, and said again, "I will pay as much as they offer. I will buy this thing." Ah. Grove was shocked when he heard this, and looked at Li Ming with his eyes wide open. Li Ming still looked calm and continued, "Anyway, this is the price you want. It doesn't matter who you sell it to." Grove then hesitated. According to what Li Ming said, the current situation is indeed the case. The Jinno civilization has no intention of coming to Ilamastar, and the prospect of reaching a deal is not clear. Li Ming is willing to pay a high price, which is naturally a good opportunity. Thinking of this, Grove nodded firmly and said, "Okay." Li Ming smiled with satisfaction when he heard the other party agree. As for the price, Li Ming had already learned it from the other party's mind. Without waiting for the other party to speak, Li Ming raised his hand, threw out a star bag, and said, "Take a look. Are these enough?" Grove was stunned by Li Ming's action before Grove said the price, but he still carefully picked up the star bag on the table. Just a sense of it. Grove looked at Li Ming in surprise. Li Ming smiled slightly and said, "If you have no objection to this price, then the energy belongs to you, and this thing belongs to me. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 479 Microworm Treatment. Li Ming's transaction with Grove was successfully concluded. After sending Grove away, Li Ming sat in front of the meteorite table in a daze, his eyes constantly looking at the golden fragments in his hand. Li Ming still needs time to study the characters on this object, but there is no rush at the moment. This strange alien character is like the ancient text discovered by archaeology. It is impossible to understand it without a certain amount of time. He clenched his right hand and put away the golden fragment. His eyes turned slightly, and when he opened his palm again, there was a round metal device. This device was exactly what Li Ming got from the trading hall. With a gentle push of his right hand, the device slowly fell on the table, and then blue light flashed, and strips of light shot out quickly from the device, and the light intertwined and woven to form a pattern. The information displayed on it was the information about the items sold in the trading hall, and there was even some auction information. Li Ming flipped through it intentionally or unintentionally, mainly to see if there were any items he needed. From selling items to auction items, Li Ming checked them one by one, just like browsing in a shopping mall. Watching with both eyes, Li Ming's expression suddenly tightened. His eyes widened a little, staring at a piece of information, and whispered, This is Ringsu? Fuck, there are still people selling this kind of thing." Li Ming looked unbelievable. The rarity of Ringsu is beyond doubt. No force or individual organization would sell such an item. But why is there still someone auctioning here? Is it also a guy who has reached the end of his rope? Regardless of the reason, the importance of this item to Li Ming is naturally needless to say. With his eyes narrowed slightly, his right hand pointed at the blue pattern and lightly clicked, and immediately confirmed to participate in the auction. With Li Ming's wealth, he is naturally not afraid of any opponent, but whoever bids the highest, Li Ming will definitely be higher than the other party. Li Ming's bidding method is simple and crude, always ensuring that his bid is the first, which does not require Li Ming to operate the device continuously. As long as Li Ming determines the item he wants to buy from the device will continue to bid the first according to Li Ming's wishes. The auction of items is time limited. After a certain time, whoever has the highest price will be the winner of the bid. After adjusting the bid, Li Ming ignored the device and turned around to walk towards a portal at the edge of the hall. A figure flashed, and he passed through the portal and came to a separate room. On the floor of the room, Li Ming leaned forward and sat down. His eyes turned, and a green light suddenly flashed on his body. Then, he spun around, and the green light on his body turned into a long shadow and entered the cloak behind Li Ming. 2 spaces have been developed in Li Ming's cloak, one for the beasts, and one for the Zerg. The green shadow was Li Ming's consciousness. At this time, Li Ming was going to enter the Zerg space to see what was going on. When he was on Scorpio, a large number of small black bugs were sucked into the Zerg space. Li Ming had never checked it afterwards. He was always a little uneasy at the moment. After all, there were so many macro bugs in the center of the cloak, which made him a little uneasy. The beasts before entering Li Ming's cloak were basically controlled by Li Ming's consciousness, but these macro bugs were not. Li Ming's worries were naturally necessary. But, with a slight sound, Li Ming's consciousness entered a completely new space. It seemed like another world here, with only the sky and the ground. The ground was endless sand dunes, with occasional protruding rocks. The sky was relatively dark, with occasional flashes of stars. Li Ming's consciousness quickly sensed the existence of those macro worms. Just a slight sense of Li Ming relaxed, and his inner worries completely disappeared at this time. The Zerg space is the same as the beast space, which is full of consciousness energy. This energy can promote the growth and survival of the creatures inside, and even mutate and evolve. And the energy contains Li Ming's consciousness. As long as the creatures inside absorb energy, they will be controlled by Li Ming. Li Ming's consciousness turned into a human form and appeared on the sand dune in an instant. Looking at the rocks in front of him, he smiled slightly. Compared with the beast clan, the consciousness of the macro worms is obviously faster, because the macro worms are small in size, and they are almost instantly eroded by the energy consciousness in Heng Yunshang. Now, after so long, all the macro worms here are Li Ming's pets. What's more amazing is that these macro worms are still growing, replicating, and evolving, just like viruses or some microorganisms. Li Ming slowly raised his right hand and saw that the rock suddenly collapsed with a bang and turned into grey dust floating in the air. If you look at it with ordinary eyes, it may be that the rock has turned into sand and dust, but Li Ming is different. He looked at the sand and dust with his eyes, and a strange smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. These so-called sand and dust turned out to be microworms. At this time, the microworms have changed from black to grey and gathered together to form rocks. After a while of floating, the microworms formed a rock on Li Ming's palm. Looking at the object in his palm, Li Ming smiled. Being able to control these microworms was beyond Li Ming's expectations, but this undoubtedly made Li Ming ecstatic. It was harmless to him, but he had an extra pet of the Zerg. Li Ming showed a satisfied look, and then slowly retracted his right hand. The body under the ideology flashed slightly, and disappeared in this space. In this way, Li Ming no longer had any unnecessary worries. He slowly opened his eyes and prepared to get up from the ground, but just as he was about to move, Li Ming suddenly opened his eyes slightly, frowned slightly, and thought to himself, these macro worms are now completely under my control. Can I? Li Ming suddenly had a bold idea in his mind. He sat down on the ground again, thinking about a plan repeatedly in his mind. After a moment, he suddenly hummed softly and made a decision. He slowly closed his eyes and gently put his right hand down. After a few seconds, Li Ming's left hand, which had been placed on his chest, was also slowly removed. However, as soon as his left hand was removed, Li Ming's expression suddenly tightened, and he felt a pain. Although the pain was unbearable, Li Ming still endured it and slowly put his left hand down. After doing this, Li Ming's mind gradually stabilized, and then the strong consciousness was released little by little. After a few seconds, his expression returned to calm, and then small whirlpools began to appear on the cloak behind Li Ming. The vortex was blue, and as soon as it appeared, grey lines flowed out from it. The lines were like thin wool, slowly crawling along the cloak behind Li Ming to Li Ming's shoulders, and then along Li Ming's ears into Li Ming's body. At this time, Li Ming was concentrating and carefully controlling the microworms to move around in his body. At the moment, Li Ming was planning to try to use the microworms to remove the residue in his chest. The microworms moved around in his body, and Li Ming was a little worried at first, but after a simple operation, Li Ming found that he could control the microworms easily, as if he was moving around in his body, relaxed and natural. This made Li Ming's tense expression gradually relax. The microworms were like grey mist, slowly dispersing in Li Ming's chest a little bit. Although it could not be detected from the outside, Li Ming could clearly sense that the microworms had now reached the location of the residue. Li Ming's current injuries were more serious than Li Ming had imagined, and this had a lot to do with Li Ming's use of the residue after swallowing it. The residue does have powerful energy. While Li Ming's body is absorbing it, the residue is also merging with the flesh in his body and slowly assimilating. The entry of the microworms is just right at this time. Once the residue is really assimilated with the flesh, it will be very dangerous. In a moment, the microworms have completely covered the residue area, as if covering it up. At this time, Li Ming must be more careful and let the microworms devour the residue little by little. There is not much residue, because it was very small when Li Ming devoured it. After Li Ming absorbed the energy, there is very little residue left, but it is already very redundant in the body. This is like a strict operation that requires caution. As time passed, Li Ming's expression changed little by little, sometimes painful, sometimes relaxed and natural. The change of expression back and forth is the microworms devouring the residue. Li Ming continued to manipulate the microworms, and it has been very effective. This is what Li Ming is happy about. As long as it works, it is worth it, even if it takes some time. The inside of my chest has been covered by a grey mist, like a bunch of insects devouring green leaves, bit by bit. Chapter 480, Cottrell reappears. Li Ming had already forgotten the time due to his concentration. Beads of sweat kept falling on his forehead, but his expression was completely relaxed. He took a long breath, and opened his eyes slightly. The grey lines gradually faded from Li Ming's ears, and returned to Li Ming's cloak. The whole process was over. There are still some residues that have assimilated with the flesh. Although it has been completely removed now, the body has still suffered some trauma. Li Ming whispered, his face slightly pale. After adjusting his body, Li Ming slowly stood up and walked out. He passed through the portal and came to the living room. He saw that the blue light on the meteorite table suddenly flashed red. Li Ming walked over immediately and came to the table. The red light was the information of the auction result. Li Ming bought Ringsu at the highest price, but the transaction method required a face-to-face interview with the seller. He raised his palm and lightly pointed at the light. The information was sent immediately. After contacting the seller, the next step was to make an appointment for a face-to-face interview. The meeting place was Li Ming's residence. It was natural that Li Ming arranged it. As long as he could get Ringsu, Li Ming could continue to advance, and achieving a higher civilization was Li Ming's only goal. After putting away the equipment for the transaction, Li Ming began to work on the transaction, but at this moment, a buzzing sound came from outside the living room door. Li Ming showed a look of surprise, raised his right hand and gently pointed it at the door, and a green light shot out. The door opened in response, and an alien was standing outside the door. The appearance of this alien was similar to the soldiers Li Ming had seen before, but now he had removed the armor on his body and put on other clothes, which looked a bit strange. Seeing the door open, the alien slowly walked in, and the door closed immediately. The alien looked at Li Ming and said, I originally thought that the one who took the Ringsu must be a big force or at least a powerful race. Now it seems. Li Ming stared at the other party intently, his eyes slowly narrowed, and just by looking at it, Li Ming's face changed slightly, but soon his demeanor returned to normal, and his eyes kept looking up and down at the other party. This familiar breath, and that memory, turned out to be, Li Ming said to himself. Although Li Ming had never seen the appearance of this alien before him, he was very clear that this person was Cottrell, whom Li Ming had known before. Obviously, Cottrell had used some means to change his appearance, and was also trapped on the Ilama planet. Li Ming recognized the other party through his wisdom eyes, but Cottrell naturally could not recognize Li Ming by his appearance. After confirming that it was Cottrell, the matter of selling Ringsu was natural. At the same time, some other ideas popped up in Li Ming's mind. He sat down in front of the meteorite table casually and said, "Let's sit down and talk." Cottrell moved, came to the meteorite table and sat down, with the corners of his mouth slightly raised, and said, "Take out your things." Li Ming smiled and leaned back easily, and said, "Let me see your things first." Cottrell paused at first, then raised his right hand, with a blue light flashing in the palm of his hand, and a white object similar to a lotus floated out. It was Ringsu, and it was pure Ringsu. Li Ming just glanced at it, and nodded with satisfaction. He looked back at Cottrell, his face slightly gloomy, and said, "Take out all the items that can be used for advancement. I will take them all." As soon as this sentence came out, Cottrell was stunned, and his eyes turned to Li Ming with a strange look. After a slight turn of his eyes, he said again, "I only have this Ringsu on me, nothing else." Li Ming raised the corner of his mouth, looked at him coldly, and said, "Cottrell, a genius in the biological civilization world, can't have only this one thing." Huh. Cottrell was suddenly exposed, and his expression tightened. He clenched his right fist, and entered a state of alert. After all, Cottrell and Li Ming were both wanted persons, and Cottrell had deceived everyone with this face, but he was still surprised when the person in front of him suddenly called out his name. Seeing the other party so nervous, Li Ming still looked calm, with no fluctuations under his calm expression. Then he turned his right hand, and a transparent glass-like box appeared in his hand. Then he gently waved his hand, and the transparent box floated over. Cottrell was surprised at first, but after seeing the transparent box, his expression relaxed slightly, his body did not move, and his eyes were completely focused on the transparent box. Just a rough look. Cottrell's eyes immediately widened a little, his expression immediately became a little excited, his eyeballs turned left and right, and he whispered, "Water of the Milky Way." That's right, there was indeed a soybean-sized object floating in the transparent box, which was a drop of water of the Milky Way. Seeing the water of the Milky Way, Cottrell's eyes changed again and again when he looked at Li Ming. In the Andromeda Galaxy, only Li Ming could recognize Cottrell without looking at him at a glance. Cottrell was very clear about this, but the person in front of him actually took out a drop of water of the Milky Way, which immediately eliminated Cottrell's doubts. Since the last time they parted on Sprague's star, Li Ming's life and death were unknown. Even if he was alive, Li Ming could not have the Cheyenne water, so Cottrell gave up his doubts. Li Ming saw through Cottrell's thoughts with his wise eyes. After a faint smile, he continued, "You should know the value of this thing. If there is only one Ringsu, it may not be enough." As he spoke, Li Ming waved his right hand, and took the drop of Cheyenne water back into his hand. Cottrell kept looking at the drop of Cheyenne water. After a slight hesitation, he snorted and turned his right hand again. Two metal balls appeared on the meteorite table. These two are the improved version of the advanced cabin. They can fully achieve the effect of Ringsu. It should be enough to exchange them with these three things, Cottrell said confidently. Li Ming looked at the three things with contempt and shook his head slightly. Seeing that Li Ming did not agree, Cottrell was suddenly startled, and a strange expression immediately appeared on his face, and there was a bit of displeasure in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Cottrell said coldly. Li Ming smiled lightly and said, "I just feel that exchanging your three things is still a bit of a disadvantage." "Humph." Cottrell snorted coldly and said, "Disadvantage? Hehe. Ringsu is a range advanced material. Do I need to say more about its rarity? In addition to these two advanced cabins of almost equal value, if you still feel that you are at a disadvantage, then our transaction can only end here." As he said this, Cottrell waved his right hand to collect the three things on the table, and quickly stood up, as if he was ready to leave. Seeing this, Li Ming quickly stood up, and said with a smile, "Wait a minute." He stopped the other party, and waved his right hand to raise the drop of Cheyenne water again, saying, "The transaction must continue. Since you don't want to, we can talk about it again." Cottrell looked at Li Ming fiercely, as if he really had no intention of continuing the transaction. Li Ming continued, as a wanted criminal in the 3 major galaxies, it would be very dangerous if your personal information is leaked. It would be a pity if you don't exchange these advanced materials for energy. As soon as these words came out, Cottrell's face suddenly changed. He looked at Li Ming again with a pair of eyes. There was a cold light flashing in his eyes. The anger in his heart was already between his eyebrows. He opened his mouth slightly and said word by word fiercely, are you threatening me? Li Ming still smiled lightly and said, if you insist on thinking so, then I really have no way, but I really don't mean that. Since it is a transaction, there must be a conversation between you and me. Otherwise, you and I sitting here, wouldn't it be a waste of words? The muscles on Cottrell's face twitched slightly. Although he was angry, he also felt helpless. Cottrell began to be more careful about the mysterious man in front of him. He was about to leave, but now he slowly sat back in his seat, staring at Li Ming, and said, so, how can I satisfy you? Chapter 481, Advancement. Li Ming finally heard what he wanted to hear, and this also meant that Cottrell had surrendered. Although Cottrell was a genius, Li Ming could not stand his behavior, so he wanted to blackmail him. After some bargaining, Li Ming gave the drop of cyan water in his hand to the other party, and on the table in front of Li Ming, in addition to the 2 metal balls and rinsu, there was also a star bag. Cottrell could only leave Li Ming's residence with a look of resentment. After seeing Cottrell leave, Li Ming smiled, put away the star bag first, then looked at rinsu and the 2 metal balls, and whispered, with these 3 things, reaching the 3rd interval is just around the corner. So saying, Li Ming waved his right hand, put away the 3 things, and stood up, and walked towards one of the portals. A flash of light appeared, and he came to a separate closed room. He waved his right hand again, and there was a buzzing sound. The electric current in the room flashed, and 2 metal balls flew out of his hands, and turned into a tall advanced cabin in the ark. After doing this, Li Ming took out rinsu again, stared at it with his eyes, and whispered, although there is no last Liu iron power, there is still cyan water. I wonder if it will be effective to use cyan water instead? As he said this, Li Ming turned his left hand, and a transparent box appeared in his palm. It was a drop of cyan water. Looking at the 2 things in his hand, Li Ming's eyes gradually moved to the advanced cabin in the room. At this time, Li Ming already had a plan for advancement in his mind. At this moment, Cottrell, who had left Li Ming's residence, walked out of the gate of the square building and stood on the street in the construction area. He turned his head back and glanced at the square building. He showed anger on his face, and his eyes seemed to be extremely unwilling to the transaction just now. As he was angry, a black spider suddenly crawled out from Cottrell's back. The spider was only the size of a palm, crawling along his back, and stopped on Cottrell's shoulder. Cottrell's eyes suddenly turned, and he looked at the spider on his shoulder and said, you don't believe that there will be another person who knows my identity? The spider was Cottrell's previous experimental subject, Mace, but I don't know what means Cottrell used to make it so small. Close to Cottrell's ear, Mace said, in the Andromeda galaxy, only that guy can see through your identity. Ordinary mental power will not be your opponent. After all, you have also practiced Ukang. Cottrell listened and nodded slightly. His eyes turned slightly, and the corners of his mouth suddenly rose slightly, revealing an evil smile. After a cold snort, he said, if that's the case, then create some trouble for him. Besides, this guy may become my biggest obstacle in the future. As he said this, Cottrell had already walked quickly into the depths of the street. Late at night, Irema welcomed the night. Under the dark sky, in a house in the construction area, Cottrell sat quietly in front of the meteorite table with a calm expression. Opposite Cottrell, sat a blue-armored person. This person was tall, with a head that looked a bit like a fish head, and his neck seemed to be covered with scales. The blue armor on his body was also composed of pieces of objects. This person was Castro, the Eye of the End, under the command of the Hades. You mean, Li Ming lives in the Camilla Free Zone? Castro looked at Cottrell with his big eyes coldly. Cottrell replied, no, I just said it's very likely, because I can't be sure yet. Castro smiled and said, thank you for the information you provided. If we confirm his identity, we will give you a certain reward. You can leave now, Castro said after raising his hand. Cottrell still had a calm expression on his face. He slowly stood up and turned to leave. When he returned to the street again, there were few people in the construction area under the night sky. After determining a direction, Cottrell walked quickly into the distance, and at this time the black spider climbed onto Cottrell's shoulder again. He said, "Will this really work?" Cottrell looked into the distance with his eyes, and with a cold expression, he opened his mouth slightly and said, "Let them help us identify whether that person is Li Ming. If it is really him, then we can leave Ilama. I've had enough of this place." Under the quiet night sky, Cottrell's lone figure disappeared in the darkness little by little. The next day, the light of the stars illuminated the continent of Ilama again, but this day was different from the past. In the south of the Camilla Free Zone, a large group of soldiers surrounded a mountain. There were flying vehicles in the sky from time to time. In the army, on a huge mechanical chariot, Castro was sitting quietly, looking at the mountain with his eyes, and said coldly, "Has the portal in the construction area been closed?" While speaking, Castro glanced at the alien Harding beside him. Harding bowed his head and replied, "It was completely sealed off last night. It is certain that the man is still inside." Castro nodded gently without saying much. The troops continued to move forward. Castro had a cold face on the giant search vehicle that looked like a tank. Harding beside him showed a hesitant expression. After hesitating for a while, he said, "Master Castro, it is not certain whether this person is really Li Ming. I don't think it is necessary to mobilize so many troops. If it is not Li Ming, then we..." Castro waved his hand, looked at the mountain in front of him coldly, and said, "Am I sending out troops just for him? I came to Iramastar to exclude everyone, and he is just the beginning. In the next period of time, everyone in the Camilla Free Zone will be interrogated by me." As he said this, the troops had surrounded the mountain. A few hundred meters away from the mountain, all the troops stopped. Castro glanced at Harding beside him and said, "Take the people in first and find them out." "Yes," Harding replied, flew up, and headed straight for the mountain. At the same time, 2 aircraft in the sky followed. A few dozen meters away from the bottom of the mountain, Harding's figure slowly fell down, raised his hand and gently tapped the rock. A flash of light appeared, and a portal appeared next to the rock. The aircraft in the sky slowly landed, and after a few soldiers came down, it came to Harding's side. Harding glanced at the 2 people, and took the lead in entering through the portal, followed by the soldiers. Passing through the portal, a flash of light, the figures of several people came to an empty cave, and at the same time a metal door appeared in front of Harding. "This place is the entrance to Li Ming's residence." Harding came to the metal door, and swiped it skillfully with his fingers. The metal door opened with a buzzing sound. However, there was a red barrier behind the metal door. The barrier was a perception barrier, and could not be detected by ordinary people. Several soldiers accompanied by Harding also walked through the barrier, and came to the hall. The hall was empty except for a number of portals around. Harding looked around and immediately locked onto a portal. He walked over quickly. After passing through the portal, he came to a closed small room. However, as soon as he entered, Harding's face changed. He saw that the room was in a mess. First, there was a pile of debris in the middle of the room, which was a completely consumed drink sewer. On the side of the room were 2 huge metal bodies, like metal capsules, more than 2 meters high, which were the advanced cabins. However, one of the 2 advanced cabins had its door open and smoke was coming out of it, which seemed to have been scrapped. Harding had never seen such a thing before. His eyes quickly turned to another relatively complete advanced cabin. He looked at it with a puzzled look, not understanding what the thing in front of him was for. After looking it up and down, Harding was ready to approach, but as soon as he took a step closer, a cloud of gray smoke suddenly swept over. The smoke came from the back of the advanced cabin like steam. Before Harding could react, his body and several soldiers behind him were instantly covered, and he had no vision in the smoke. Chapter 482. Check one by one. I couldn't figure out what was going on, but I just felt a buzzing sound in my head, and then I lost consciousness, and I stood there with my eyes wide open, not moving. The smoke did not fade away, but continued to spread rapidly. In just a moment, the whole house and the living room outside disappeared in the smoke. Castro, who was outside, frowned slightly, because from the outside, the smoke was covering the entire mountain little by little, as if the body would release this mist. "What is this?" Castro looked puzzled, staring at the smoke with his eyes fixed, not understanding the reason. After a while, the fog began to expand, and the surroundings of the mountain were completely covered. Moreover, the fog showed no sign of stopping, and continued to spread, as if it was going to cover the surrounding area. Seeing the fog coming quickly, as if it was going to engulf his troops, Castro's face changed slightly, and his brows frowned slightly. This mist is no different from ordinary fog, but it is very concentrated, and spreads at an amazing speed. This spread is not only to the surroundings, but also to the high altitude. The mist will not reach only a dozen meters high like the black fog in the insect hole. Instead, it rushes straight to the sky, covering a large area of the sky. Castro looked at it with a strange look on his face. After a cold snort, his figure flew up little by little, and then went straight into the mist. As soon as he entered the mist, Castro noticed something strange. He looked around and whispered, "This mist actually has energy. Could it be?" As he was whispering, the mist suddenly shrank quickly, as if something was taking it away. Although the mist spread quickly enough, it shrank faster, like a gust of wind blowing, and the thick mist returned to the mountain. At this time, Castro, who was in the air, became more confused. He looked at the mountain below, and hesitated to move forward. At this moment, a figure slowly walked out of the portal in front of the mountain. It was Harding. Castro was slightly stunned. After looking at Harding, he frowned slightly, lowered his body slightly, and said, "What's going on inside?" Harding bowed his head and replied, "That person is not inside. I don't know. I don't know where he went." Harding said this with a trembling look, as if he was afraid of being blamed. Castro was indeed very angry. His eyes widened a little. He looked at the mountain and said, "No one. What's the matter with the fog just now?" Harding was startled and hesitated for a moment. He stammered, I don't know. Humph." Castro snorted unhappily, moved to the ground, glanced at Harding, and quickly entered the portal. Harding stood there cautiously, motionless, his eyes slightly turned, watching Castro enter. A moment later, Castro walked out, confused, standing in front of Harding, without saying a word, thinking about something. People suddenly disappeared. The fog is very strange. Could it be Li Ming? Or, as he spoke, Castro looked back at the mountain again, took a deep breath, and said, "Let's go back to the construction area." As he spoke, Castro walked quickly towards the troops, while Harding paused, looked back at the mountain, and quickly followed Castro away. The mighty troops began to move towards the construction area. Castro was a little absent-minded sitting in the chariot, and his puzzled expression was naturally still a little puzzled about what had just happened. As for the strange phenomenon just now, not to mention Castro, even the soldiers could sense the abnormality, but they just didn't find it abnormal. The troops arrived at the Camilla Free Zone and drove directly into the building. The aircraft in the air also flew back and forth, to be alert to all abnormalities. In the center of the construction area is a cylindrical building, which is not very eye-catching in the entire construction area, but it is the place where the management of the Camilla Free Zone is located. The car kept driving along the streets in the construction area, and the aliens who were originally on the street retreated far away. When they arrived at the door of the circular building, and stopped the car, Castro got off the chariot, and walked into the building, followed by Harding. In a closed room in the circular building, Castro sat in front of the meteorite table, looking at Harding standing beside him, and said, "The entire Camilla Free Zone is within the barrier. No matter who leaves, we will know in advance. Whether that person is Li Ming or not, you should arrange for the others to be checked one by one." Harding bowed his head and replied, "Yes, I will do it right away." Harding was about to turn around and leave, but as soon as he turned around, Castro suddenly said, "Wait." Harding stopped immediately after hearing the voice. Castro then stood up, hesitated for a while, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he did not speak, just paused for a while, waved his hand, and said, "You go first, and notify me immediately after the arrangement." Castro's sudden pause made Harding startled. His eyes slightly turned, bowed again, and whispered, "Okay." Then Harding left. Castro, on the other hand, had a look of thinking about something else, staring at the door, as if in a daze, and slowly sat back down. Next, Harding began to command the soldiers to gather and search all the people in the Camilla-free zone. Harding's task was to gather all the people here, and then Castro would check them one by one. There were a large number of stray people in the entire Camilla-free zone. Whether they wanted to enter the central system or the external system, they were all gathered near the circular building. At this time, everyone would face the most stringent screening. At the bottom of the circular building, there was a purple portal. Those waiting to be screened were gradually entering the purple portal one by one. There were soldiers on both sides, and these people could only be inspected under the supervision of the soldiers. Harding sat far away, watching these quietly, and occasionally glanced at the purple portal, as if he had a great interest in the portal. Through the purple portal, there was a black house inside. On the top of the house, a green flying dragon was hidden in the rocks on the top, and the environment in the room was under its observation. The room was not big, and there was a silver metal machine in the middle. Those who came in from the portal passed through the metal equipment one by one, and were being inspected. In this device, every alien who entered the device would be displayed on the blue light screen next to it as an image, just like the security equipment at the station. Castro sat aside and watched the changes on the screen coldly. This detection method is to see the physique, energy, breath and other information of the alien passing through the light radiation in the device. This information is crucial and is also important information for distinguishing the identity of an alien. The Andromeda Galaxy belongs to a large unified galaxy. There are only two civilizations in the entire galaxy. One is the White Civilization and the other is an Axis civilization, so people passing through will be quickly identified. The White Civilization and an Axis civilization are both broad civilizations, similar to the Geno civilization. This civilization contains many races. People of different races have different appearances, but there are relevant records, so it is easy to identify. Broad civilization represents a civilization with different races and different attributes. The attributes include 5 major ability civilizations, such as power civilization, wisdom civilization, biological civilization, etc. The monitoring speed of this kind of equipment is naturally very fast. Even though there are many people in the Camilla-free zone, it won't take long under this kind of equipment. Harding sat on a high place, looking down at the people waiting to be accepted below. Among the many people, 2 people caught Harding's attention. These 2 aliens are very special. They may be ordinary in the eyes of others, but Harding can see the difference at once. One of them is Cottrell, who has changed his appearance. This person is one of the people Harding pays great attention to, and the other is more special. His whole body is wrapped in heavy black armor, and only a pair of eye holes are exposed on his head. The strange appearance is only one of them. The main thing is that his inner and outer thoughts are also a bit abnormal. Of course, the reason why he can see these is entirely because Harding is Li Ming's illusion. Chapter 483 Lanjingzang. In the closed room, the detection equipment was still running, and aliens were passing through here one by one. Among the many aliens, some aliens who were considered unqualified would be taken to a separate area by soldiers and controlled by cages. Half of the aliens outside had been tested, but only 2 of them were truly unqualified. Although Harding was sitting outside, Phi Long was in the testing room, so everything was under control. At this time, among the remaining half of the aliens outside, some strange phenomena had begun to appear, and even various whispers were heard from time to time. Of course, any clues could not escape Harding's eyes. Watching the crowd move, Cottrell had entered the passage, and was preparing to enter the purple portal with the alien in front. Li Ming had already seen the equipment inside. With Cottrell's physical information, it would definitely not pass the inspection. Of course, this was better, as Li Ming had no good impression of this person. Not far behind Cottrell was the armored man. Li Ming looked at him intently, and the 2 seemed to be within his attention range. A moment later, Cottrell flashed in from the purple portal, and some people behind him gradually entered. Li Ming just watched quietly, without saying a word, with a calm and indifferent expression. As for the result inside, it was just as Li Ming guessed. Those who were not from the Andromeda Galaxy were all locked up alone. As the number of people outside became fewer and fewer, a device in Li Ming's left hand suddenly beeped. Li Ming raised his hand and took a look, then stood up and left. Entering from the main entrance of the building, he came to a closed room. There was no one inside. Li Ming stood there waiting. After a moment, Castro's figure appeared, standing high in the room, looking down at Li Ming, and said, "Harding, I have an emergency meeting to deal with. You will take care of those who have been screened out first." Li Ming was startled at first, but still leaned over and said, "Yes." After saying this, Castro turned and left. Li Ming frowned slightly, his eyes kept turning, and after hesitating for a while, he also turned and left. Under the building is a prison. Those who have been screened out are locked up in separate prisons. The prisons here are separate small rooms. The difference is that these small rooms are set up with layers of prohibitions. According to the supervision rules of the big galaxy, people who enter the prison will be put on chains to suppress their body energy to ensure that the prisoners will not escape. However, these selected people were not put on chains, but were locked up in small rooms with layers of barriers. A total of 6 unidentified people were found in the entire Camilla building area, and they were locked up in 6 small rooms. The prison here belongs to the 5th level prison. In Li Ming's cognition, this is the lowest level of prison. Prisons of different levels have different configurations. Obviously, those people are not forcibly restrained here, but only temporarily placed. In the middle of the prison is a hall, guarded by soldiers, divided into 2 floors. The 6 people are all locked up on the 1st floor, and under the transparent barrier wall, you can see 6 people sitting quietly in the room, seemingly unconcerned. Everyone is calm, as if they don't take the detention seriously. Li Ming sat in the room on the 2nd floor, closing his eyes to rest. His eyes were closed, but he was constantly thinking about things. Each of these 6 people is extraordinary and possesses unusual energy. Interesting things will be discovered slowly in a while. After all, I have just reached the 1.9 level of civilization, so I still need to stabilize myself first. Thinking of this, Li Ming showed a satisfied smile. In Li Ming's career of advancing to higher civilizations, there has never been an advancement as smooth as this one. 1 Ringsu and 2 advancement cabins allowed Li Ming to enter the current level of civilization calmly without any risk. At such a high level, Li Ming's own abilities and energy still need to be stabilized. But just as Li Ming was preparing to practice, a message suddenly came to his mind. "You are really a guy who is not afraid of death." The voice was like someone saying something in his mind. Li Ming's expression immediately changed, his eyes widened a little, and after a slight hesitation, he stood up and walked outside. Arriving at the empty 2nd floor, there was no one around. Li Ming came to the 1st floor without stopping. Everything was normal on the 1st floor. The soldiers stood at their posts motionless, and the people in the 6 rooms were still calm. Li Ming's pace slowly slowed down, and began to check each room one by one. The sentence just now was transmitted to Li Ming's mind through the powerful consciousness ability, and the existence that can possess such a powerful consciousness must be spiritual civilization. Li Ming completely let go of his consciousness, and began to watch the 6 people little by little. The one in the 1st room was Cottrell, who Li Ming directly ruled out. The one in the 2nd room was the armored man wrapped in armor, who was also directly ruled out. Li Ming's pace slowly came to the 3rd room. This person was fat, with black armor on his body, even his head was dark black, and there were 2 long fangs in his mouth, which looked a bit like a wild boar's head. After a simple look, Li Ming continued to move forward, and came to the 4th room. The person in the 4th room was very different, because this guy was relatively short, slightly fat, with blue hair all over his body, a head like a cat, but big ears. It is more like a pet than an alien, but through the induction of consciousness, Li Ming found that this guy has independent consciousness, which also meets the characteristics of alien consciousness. This guy's naturally not the one Li Ming is looking for. Going forward is the 5th room. In the room is a yellow-white guy, whose figure is almost the same as the plush monster in the previous room, but his body surface is all hard metal, and it is relatively rough, and you can even see the gaps after the limbs are spliced. The technology is not even as gentle as the robots on Earth, just like a pile of robots made of building blocks. But this person also has his own independent consciousness, but he is not the one he is looking for. Li Ming continued to move forward, and came to the last room. Just to look with his eyes, Li Ming was stunned. The appearance and size of this person are extremely similar to those of humans. He is dressed in blue and black armor, with a blue-gray cloak behind him, and a half-metal mask on his face, which covers his nose and mouth. The strange thing about this mask is that the part that blocks the nose is bulging and hard, like an iron mask, but the part below the mouth is softer, as if a slit was cut at the mouth of the mask. His eyes and hair are the same as those of humans, as if he is a human being armed with armor. His upper body is looking at the wall in the room. His eyes are closed, one leg is stretched, and the other leg is bent. "Would you like to sit down and talk?" That voice entered Li Ming's ears again. Hearing this voice, Li Ming's expression immediately perked up, and he was completely sure that this guy was the person he was looking for. Without saying much, he stretched out his hand and pointed at the barrier in front of him. After a hum sound, a door opened on the barrier, and Li Ming stepped into it and leaned over to sit cross-legged opposite him. As Li Ming sat down, the other party's eyes slowly opened, the corners of his eyes moved slightly, and he smiled and said, "Li Ming, it really feels a bit similar to the description." Li Ming was puzzled by this sentence, but the other party's mental strength and consciousness seemed to be comparable to Li Ming, and he could not explore it at all. "Who are you? How do you know me?" Li Ming said quietly with his eyes slightly narrowed. The masked man did not move, hesitated for a moment, and said, "My name is Lunjing Zhang. It was an accident to meet you, but it may also be some kind of unique arrangement, but you will understand, as long as I say a name." Li Ming's expression tightened, and he suddenly became serious. Lunjing Zhang then turned his eyes and looked at Li Ming, and continued, "But before that, I still want to tell you something else." Without waiting for the other party to continue, Li Ming immediately turned stern and replied, "I'm not interested in talking too much to a stranger." Huh. Lunjing Zhang was slightly surprised, sneered, and chuckled, and replied, "Well, I still like people with personality. I wonder if you still remember a person named Tanjing." Tanjing? Li Ming's eyes immediately widened a little. Chapter 484 Tanjing's Enemy. Li Ming naturally remembered Tanjing. In order to save Li Ming, he was abandoned on a wandering planet, and he had to face the vicious Zerg. Hearing the other party say this name, Li Ming's mood gradually stabilized and said, "What is your relationship with Tanjing? Where is she now?" Lunjing Zhang paused and did not answer immediately. His wandering eyes looked into the distance. After a slight hesitation, he said, "It seems that it is really necessary to make this clear. As for Tanjing, you should know a lot about her. As for her life experience, Tanjing, a rare aerospace civilization. This civilization once appeared on a satellite galaxy of the Andromeda Galaxy. However, later the Andromeda Galaxy was going to carry out the great unification of alien species, so this race, that had not yet reached the peak of civilization, suffered a devastating blow. Under this blow, not many people of this race could survive. Tanjing was one of them, and the other was Biggs. Tanjing and Biggs were still different. Although they belonged to the same aerospace civilization, Tanjing belonged to the Orthodox Development Civilization, while Biggs' race was a subsidiary civilization. Simply put, after Tanjing's race developed to a certain scale, it unified Biggs' race and passed on its own civilization development background. However, only a few people survived the subsequent destruction. Lunjing Zhang is not from the Sky and Space Civilization, but from the Power Civilization. He is an alien who was adopted in the Sky and Space Civilization since childhood, but he is also a newcomer of the civilization, and he was taught star-level abilities, helped to advance, and even taught the ability of 6th domain star Hui Sheng. Hui Sheng corresponds to the Power Civilization, which is why Lunjing Zhang has a strong mental power, but it is not a spiritual civilization. In the War of Destruction, the patriarch of the race entrusted Tanjing to Lunjing Zhang, hoping to be raised by the other party, but after becoming an adult, Tanjing was determined to take revenge, and quietly left Lunjing Zhang. This led to the later encounter with Li Ming. Although Tanjing finally got in touch with Lunjing Zhang, he still hoped that Lunjing Zhang could take revenge with him, but it was a pity that he was rejected by Lunjing Zhang. At the same time, Lunjing Zhang also persuaded Tanjing to give up revenge temporarily, but failed. In desperation, Lunjing Zhang had to set off to the Andromeda Galaxy to find Tanjing's whereabouts. After listening to Lunjing Zhang's story, Li Ming finally understood, nodded slightly, looked at the other party with his eyes, and said, "Then, who is Tanjing's enemy?" Lan Jingzhang took a deep breath, hesitated for a moment, and replied, "The Queen of the Andromeda Galaxy, Wizard and Dark Master." Hearing this name, Li Ming nodded again, and said nothing more, but he was already thinking in his mind. After a few seconds, Li Ming's eyes turned and said, "Then where is Tanjing now?" Lan Jingzhang hummed softly, shook his head slightly, and said, "I came here to find her, but I didn't expect that entering the central system is so complicated now, and I didn't expect that I would find you first." Li Ming's expression was calm, and his thoughts were turning. "Okay, let's talk about something else." Lan Jingzhang's easygoing expression didn't seem to be very urgent or worried. As he said this, he folded his hands behind his head and looked very proud. Li Ming frowned in confusion. On the surface, Lan Jingzhang didn't seem to be in a hurry to find Tanjing. Seeing the other party's indifference, Li Ming snorted and said, "In that case, I really want to ask you what that sentence means." Huh? Lan Jingzhang was startled, but after thinking carefully, he laughed a few times and said, "I almost forgot." What Li Ming wanted to ask was the sentence he received in his mind on the second floor. Lan Jingzhang looked at Li Ming again and said, "How long have you been in the third interval?" "I just entered the third interval." "Is there any taboo in upgrading the civilization level?" Li Ming asked with some doubt. Lan Jingzhang nodded slightly, and his expression became serious. The third interval civilization is the existence closest to the second level civilization. People like you who have just entered the third interval may not know that higher level civilizations will not allow lower level civilizations to advance to their level. Lan Jingzhang said very seriously. As soon as these words came out, Li Ming's expression tightened, and his brows frowned slightly. Lan Jingzhang continued, "Entering advanced civilization is the dream of every life. With a higher civilization, you will have and control more things, but you will also face suppression from advanced civilizations. Once you enter the third interval, you will be under their surveillance, and you will soon see things you don't want to see." Lan Jingzhang's cold words were filled with fear, and even his eyes were full of worry when he spoke. Obviously, he had some terrible experience after entering the third interval. Li Ming could feel and see that this would be very terrifying. If Li Ming could still deal with the cross-interval civilization, but the cross-level civilization, there would be no room for struggle for the low-level civilization. After hesitating for a few seconds in the fearful memory, Lan Jingzhang continued, "If you want to survive, there is only one choice. Give up the advancement to the second level civilization and become a non-advanced civilization. Only in this way can you get the favor of the advanced civilization and survive smoothly." Li Ming naturally understood this statement. Non-advanced civilization. Li Ming understood when he was still a 9th level civilization that in the Milky Way, some 9th level civilizations had to give up advancement and become non-advanced civilizations in order to prevent suppression from higher civilizations. It is not difficult to become a non-advanced civilization. According to Li Ming's current level, a small advancement requires the consumption of 1 red ren, and an interval advancement requires 1 ringsu. After reaching a 1.9 level civilization, continuing to use red ren to enhance the energy content in the body will directly ruin one's fate of advancement. Because from a 1.9 level civilization to a second level civilization, it requires something more powerful to support the advancement, and after using red ren or ringsu, the energy body in the body will be disrupted, and it will never be possible to become a second level civilization. Although Li Ming has not encountered the fearful thing that Lan Jingzhang said, Li Ming still believes this statement. Seeing the worry and sadness on Li Ming's face, Lan Jingzhang laughed several times and said, "You don't have to worry too much. It's not impossible to enter the second level civilization by advancing, but you must hide yourself and find the materials for advancement. It's just, the probability is very low. Whether you can advance depends on your luck." Li Ming listened carefully and nodded slightly. He naturally understood. Every level advancement is like a bottleneck period. Everyone who advances to the 1.9 level civilization must face a choice, and Li Ming is no exception. Either a dull life, or give it a try. Either live or die. This is a problem, especially for Li Ming. From the lowest level of civilization, step by step to the present, the hardship will make people cherish it more. Heh. Li Ming chuckled, shook his head slightly, turned his eyes, and looked at Lan Jingzhang intently, saying, "Since you are here to find Tanjing, do you know her whereabouts?" Lan Jingzhang's expression changed slightly, but a smile still appeared at the corner of his mouth, and said, "Everyone is looking for you now, you don't know yet." Li Ming frowned slightly, and said with a puzzled look, "Everyone?" Seeing Li Ming's surprised and puzzled expression, Lan Jingzhang looked at the barrier on the left, and the other side of the barrier was the other prison rooms. "Among the 5 people next to you, one came to kill you," Lan Jingzhang then said. Li Ming was startled when he heard this, and his eyes couldn't help but look in the direction of other rooms. Although he couldn't see anything through the barrier, he was still a little surprised when he heard Lan Jingzhang say this. At this time, Lan Jingzhang continued, "The Triangulum Galaxy, the Andromeda Galaxy, and the mysterious Jinro civilization and Nusu civilization are all looking for your whereabouts. But it's really a good idea for you to hide here in this form," Lan Jingzhang said, but this sentence seemed to be quite appreciative of Li Ming's hiding method. But Li Ming knew very well that Lan Jingzhang in front of him was a person with the ability of the 6th domain maxing Husheng, and Husheng corresponds to the power civilization, so it is not surprising that the other party can obtain some strange information. "If you are willing to help, I can find Tanjing faster," Lan Jingzhang suddenly said, which made Li Ming, who was thinking, suddenly startled. His thoughts were interrupted, his eyes turned, and looked at Lan Jingzhang in front of him. Lan Jingzhang suddenly became serious and continued, "I won't let you help me for nothing." Li Ming did not rush to agree, but said, "How can I help you?" Chapter 485, Plans cannot keep up with changes. After a brief thought, Lan Jingzhang smiled and said, "Tanjing's target is the Hades. As long as the Hades appear, Tanjing will also appear soon. Leading the Hades to this Ilama star is the best way." Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly when he heard this. Without waiting for the other party to continue, Li Ming had already seen through the other party's intention. Lan Jingzhang then continued, "The people imprisoned in the 3 rooms in the middle on my left are not ordinary people. The person covered in armor is Julu from the Nusu civilization. She is an enemy of the Andromeda Galaxy. The other is Barnard in the middle room. He is a member of the Great Demon Star Raiders group and an enemy of the Triangulum Galaxy. Finally, there is the yellow robot, Cuban. The Lahu civilization he belongs to has attacked the Triangulum Galaxy many times." After saying this, Lan Jingzhang raised his eyes slightly and said, "Once this information is disseminated, it will be enough to attract the attention of the Hades. As long as the Hades can appear on this Ilama planet, then Tanjing will appear." Li Ming had understood it at this moment and replied, "Use these people to lure the Hades." Lan Jingzhang nodded slightly, but there was a look of worry between his brows. He said with some concern, "But Castro is a cautious person. I believe that when we passed through the detection equipment just now, he had guessed the identities of us. It's just that he didn't dare to take any action, so he locked us all up in this kind of place. Based on my understanding of Castro, he might let us all go to avoid escalating the situation," Lan Jingzhang said with some concern. Li Ming's eyes turned slightly, and he stood up and said, "Then let me handle this matter." Lan Jingzhang looked up at Li Ming in surprise. Li Ming said, "After all, my current identity is still Harding, and I have some power. Besides, I have other ways." Lan Jingzhang saw this, and looked as if he had suddenly realized something, but his eyes were still sharp. He said, "Although this is not where I want you to help me, it's good this way. In that case, please." Lan Jingzhang looked up and said solemnly. Li Ming smiled slightly, but didn't say anything more. At this moment, on the top floor of the building area, Castro was standing quietly in front of a meteorite table, looking at the pattern woven by blue light on the meteorite table, with a stern and somewhat ugly expression. The pattern on the meteorite table was the figure of the Hades. Has the situation on Ilama become so complicated? The ghost's face was a little ugly, and he said coldly. Castro was relatively calm, and after a moment of hesitation, he replied, "I suggest not to alarm these people. Our target is Li Ming. Now our relationship with the Triangulum Galaxy is quite tense. If the situation becomes serious at this time, it may be more disadvantageous to us." The ghost nodded slowly and replied, "I know this. Castro then continued to reply, moreover, Li Ming is very likely to be on Alama. The ghost's expression immediately changed after hearing this, and he said, what do you mean by this? Castro replied, originally, a suspicious person was found, but his specific location has not been found yet, but we have established a perception barrier, and this person will not run away. The ghost nodded with satisfaction after hearing this, and after thinking for a moment, he said, if Li Ming is really there, I will go there in person. This matter can no longer be handled by Kang Huan. Castro frowned slightly after hearing this, and after hesitating for a while, he said, do you mean, you want to come in person? The dark man nodded slightly and replied, if we find Li Ming, we can not only regain the Yi energy, but also exchange it for Zuanfang, and give an explanation to the Cheyenne guards. The troubles of the Andromeda Galaxy can be solved. Kang Huan and Tisan have already disappointed Her Majesty the Queen, so I need to deal with this matter personally. After hearing this, Castro's face changed slightly. After thinking about it again, he replied, since you are coming here in person, then, can all those people stay? What I mean is that I'm still not sure whether Li Ming is really on the Irama star. If you come here in person, even if Li Ming is not here, it will be beneficial for us to get rid of these people. Castro said carefully, there is some truth in this. If Li Ming is here, he should be captured first, and the others don't need to be alarmed to avoid unnecessary trouble. But if Li Ming is not here, it will be worthwhile to get rid of these potential enemies. The ghost nodded slightly and said, Then he said, then you will stabilize your side first. I will get there as soon as possible. Yes. Castro replied. After this reply, the blue light on the meteorite table disappeared little by little, and everything returned to normal. But at this moment, the portal in the room suddenly flickered slightly. Castro glanced at it and clicked it casually. The portal made a light hum. With a flash of light, Li Ming walked out. Castro sat down slowly in front of the meteorite table, looked at the person at the door, and said, what's wrong, Harding, is there anything? Li Ming raised his head and looked at the other person. He didn't say what he wanted to say. His brows were slightly frowned, and he hesitated, but he didn't say anything. Seeing Li Ming like this, Castro immediately looked unhappy and said, what? Is there anything else that I can't tell you? No, I just want to ask, what are you going to do with those people in the prison? Li Ming said in a panic. Castro was calm and didn't care. He said casually, let's keep those people there for now. Now we can deal with them after we confirm Li Ming's whereabouts. Li Ming nodded slowly, but his expression kept changing. While Li Ming was thinking, Castro suddenly said, is that all? Li Ming bowed and saluted. After hesitating for a while, he replied, I'm overthinking. I will take my leave. As he said this, Li Ming gradually retreated. But when he retreated to the door, Li Ming suddenly froze. His eyes widened a little, and his eyes looked at Castro, as if he had made some amazing discovery. But this expression lasted less than a second, and Li Ming quickly retreated through the portal and left. Coming out of the portal, Li Ming came to the second floor hall of the underground prison. After standing there for a while, he returned to the small room on the second floor. In the separate closed room, Li Ming came to the meteorite table and sat down, whispering, the Hades has decided to come to Alamastar. But, thinking of this, Li Ming became a little restless again. His eyes rolled slightly, and after thinking for a while, he stood up again and walked out. Coming back to the lobby on the second floor of the prison, Li Ming's footsteps did not stop, and he continued to pass through the portal to the first floor of the underground prison, and walked straight into Lang Jingzhang's room. Seeing Li Ming return so quickly, Lang Jingzhang raised his eyes slightly, looked at Li Ming, and then his eyebrows shrank, because Li Ming's face was not very good at the moment. Li Ming squatted down and said, the Hades has decided to come to Ilamastar in person. Lang Jingzhang sat up in surprise, and there was a look of surprise in the corners of his eyes, as if he couldn't believe that Li Ming would handle it so quickly and so smoothly. But Li Ming's face was still ugly. Lang Jingzhang also saw it, frowned again, and said, what? Is there something else? Li Ming glanced at Lang Jingzhang, his eyes drooping, with a look of difficulty. After hesitating for a while, he said, but Tanjing may not come. Lang Jingzhang was shocked. Li Ming continued, I'm not afraid to tell you that I have the ability of spiritual civilization and wisdom. I just saw a piece of information about Tanjing from Castro. Tanjing was captured by the Andromeda Galaxy a long time ago and is now imprisoned in another prison, so. Li Ming then said. As soon as this news came out, Lan Jingzhang's eyes suddenly became dull and his body leaned back against the wall slightly, as if he had lost his mind. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 486, Wanting to be a hero to save the beauty. The huge turn of events was beyond Lan Jingzhang's expectation, which made things more complicated. Because for now, it is unrealistic to leave Ilamastar as an important review site for critical points. Once it is determined that you must stay here, it is almost difficult to get away, because critical points have powerful technological weapons that have devastating blows to spacecraft, so leaving becomes more difficult, not to mention that the Hades will come here in person. Not only Lan Jingzhang, but also Li Ming, fell into silence at this moment, because Li Ming did not expect things to turn out like this. The two of them fell silent, as if they didn't know what to do. But Li Ming had other thoughts. Lan Jingzhang was thinking about how to save Tanjing, but Li Ming was different. Li Ming was thinking about whether to save Tanjing. According to Lan Jingzhang, once you reach the 1.9 level civilization, you must hide yourself as much as possible, otherwise you will be sanctioned by the advanced civilization. From a personal point of view, Li Ming had no need to do this, but there was still some friendship between Li Ming and Tanjing, so he couldn't bear not to save her. Most importantly, Li Ming still appreciated her beauty. After some thought, Li Ming finally said, it's not that there is no way to save Tanjing. Lan Jingzhang opened his eyes slightly and said, what you mean is? Li Ming breathed a sigh of relief and thought to himself, damn it, for the beauty, not for friendship, I will let go. Thinking of this, he said, use me to exchange for Tanjing. There is no reason for the other party to refuse. Huh. Lan Jingzhang was startled at first, but his face changed slightly, but he didn't say a word. Li Ming's eyes turned, looking at Lan Jingzhang, and said, Li Ming is in your hands. Does the ghost have to hand over Tanjing? Lan Jingzhang knew very well that Li Ming meant to trade himself in exchange for Tanjing. The feasibility of this method was naturally no problem. After all, the two galaxies were trying to find Li Ming. Compared with Tanjing, Li Ming's value was naturally the highest. But Lan Jingzhang naturally couldn't sacrifice Li Ming like this. He hesitated a little and shook his head slightly. The civilization I have received since childhood does not support me to do such a thing. It is very difficult to ask you to take the risk to help. While speaking, Lan Jingzhang shook his head. Under the wisdom of the other party, Li Ming's thoughts were all in his eyes. Of course, if Li Ming was not on guard, his thoughts would also be detected by the other party's wisdom. Looking at the other party, Li Ming slowly stood up, looking at Lan Jingzhang with his eyes, pausing for a few seconds, and then turned and left. Walking out of the room, the barrier automatically closed. Li Ming had his own ideas at this moment. Standing in the middle of the first floor of the prison, his eyes swept through the 6 rooms in front of him. Although Li Ming did not do anything, this action made everyone in the room look at him. Even the soldiers guarding the surroundings looked at this place in confusion. Li Ming raised his right hand slightly, just a slight movement, and the soldiers around him fell to the ground with a thump and fainted. Li Ming raised his right hand and waved it gently, and with a bang, it was like the lights suddenly went out, and all the barriers in the room disappeared directly. Only then did Li Ming put his hand down and said, you are free, and can leave here. This sudden action naturally attracted the strange looks of these people. Among them, the yellow and white robot in the middle area said, who do you think you are? Do you think I will leave if you tell me to? Another slightly fat man in black armor walked out of the room and said, then who will be responsible for the time I was locked up? Is it you? The slightly fat alien Barnard turned his dark head to Li Ming and looked at him coldly. At this time, Lan Jingzhang also walked out of his room, looked around, and said, since you have made a decision, let me cooperate with you. As soon as the voice fell, Lang Jingzhang's right hand suddenly stretched out into the void, and the whole palm disappeared, but the arm was still there. However, if you look carefully, you can find that Lan Jingzhang's palm did not disappear, but a vacuum energy ball covered his palm. This vacuum energy only hid Lan Jingzhang's hand, but other things can still be seen through the energy ball. Then, with a muffled bang, the energy ball instantly expanded and engulfed Li Ming and Lan Jingzhang. Once the two were covered, their bodies became transparent and disappeared. Barnard glanced and whispered, "Lan Jingzhang's escape from the sky, it's really interesting." As he said this, Barnard turned and walked outside. Boom. With a loud bang, the door of the circular building exploded, as if it had been exploded, and gravel and dust flew out. Then a figure walked out of it. It was Barnard. At this time, the Camilla-free zone was already very empty, without a single person in sight. When the breeze blew, some garbage and debris could be seen blowing over occasionally. At this time, Li Ming and Lan Jingzhang were already on the top of a building, but they were already invisible, which was the effect of Lan Jingzhang's vacuum energy. Standing on the top of the building, the two looked up and saw that the sky was gradually getting darker. The previous barrier of the Camilla-free zone had shrunk. The original barrier covered the mountains in the distance, but now it only covered the building area. As for the top of the head, several huge spaceships were approaching. Lan Jingzhang looked at Li Ming beside him and said, "What are you going to do next?" Li Ming's eyes quickly returned to the bottom, looking at the people who were gradually walking out of the circular building, and said, "Follow them." Huh. Lan Jingzhang was suddenly startled and showed a puzzled look. Li Ming continued, "As far as Ilima is concerned, there is no place safer than this. I must hide until the Hades show up. According to the information I have received, if the Hades arrive at Ilima and do not find me, they will first deal with the people below." At this point, Li Ming looked at the people downstairs, and then continued, "When the conflict between the Hades and them escalates, I think it will be more appropriate for me to appear at that time. Only under this kind of pressure, the chance of using me to exchange for Tanjing will be higher." As he spoke, Li Ming seemed to have a plan in mind. Lan Jingzhang looked at Li Ming with strange eyes and whispered, "What a strange guy. What kind of mother planet can give birth to such a life? It must be a great mother planet." Lan Jingzhang still muttered to himself. The aliens who are mixed in the universe are very clear that the more advanced the civilization, the more they will pay attention to their own interests, and their emotions will gradually fade, because advanced civilizations have a stronger ability to understand, and their understanding of life, needs, and willingness to give up are all beyond the cognition of low-level life. They will clearly understand and judge the situation, whether to fight for it or give up, and will not drag their feet and mix more emotions into it. Only some special life forms born from special mother planets will retain the characteristics of emotions. Lan Jingzhang is naturally one of them, but Lan Jingzhang's civilization level also allows him to have a great ability to judge things. He can't stop Li Ming's plan, so it's better to cooperate perfectly. There are already 5 people standing on the street below the building. They were all released from the barrier by Li Ming. Of course, with these people's civilization level and ability, it is easy to leave the shackles of the barrier. Li Ming's eyes looking at these people are also extremely indifferent. There are all people who Li Ming hates very much, especially the mechanical life called Cuban. The sentence "Who are you?" makes Li Ming still remember it in his heart, but now Li Ming doesn't want to expose himself too much. The spaceship in the sky floats slowly, and the building area below is completely covered. The entire building area is already covered, and the spaceship can launch an attack at any time. And the building area has been wrapped by the barrier. The red barrier is like a heating bowl that completely locks this place in. Cottrell looked at the other people. Even though he didn't know them, he knew that they were not easy to deal with. In addition to the spaceship in the sky, Cottrell's right hand had quietly turned over and held a metal ball in his hand. Behind Cottrell was a small low-rise building next to the circular building. After Cottrell took a quick look, the black spider mace on his right arm had appeared. Chapter 487, Evil Plan. Mace took the metal ball from Cottrell's palm, then crawled down Cottrell's legs to the ground, crawled quickly along the surface, and quietly entered the low-rise building. At this time, the others were still paying attention to the spaceship in the sky. A few seconds later, a muffled sound of bang suddenly came out, and the others were startled. they saw that there was a sudden airwave rushing out of the low-rise building, cracking the door and the wall, as if a bomb exploded inside. Then a group of black mists quickly poured out from inside. Li Ming, who was on the upper floor, immediately noticed this, narrowed his eyes slightly, frowned when he saw the black mist, and whispered, "Insect hole." Just as Li Ming said, the object that had just been detonated was the insect hole black mist. In a blink of an eye, the black mist enveloped the entire nearby area, and the 5 people on the street also disappeared in the black mist. At this time, Lan Jingzhang's eyes turned and looked at Li Ming beside him, saying, "As for the hiding place, leave it to me." As soon as the voice fell, Lan Jingzhang's right hand turned again, and a square object appeared in his hand. This object was crystal clear, and its appearance was like a 2-story building. It was transparent as a whole, just like a model of a crystal building. And the next moment, with a hum, this object suddenly became larger and formed a transparent attic in the air. Lan Jingzhang took a look at the attic in the air and said, "Let's go." After saying that, Lan Jingzhang flew in first. Li Ming looked at the transparent attic and then flew over. Li Ming still had some knowledge about this object. When Li Ming had not entered the advanced civilization, there was a method for making this kind of void building in the space-time tribe on Inkina star. Li Ming was studying the space-time castle. The materials needed to make this object were relatively scarce. Li Ming did not come across such materials, so he did not make it. At present, Lan Jingzhang's 2-story attic is a type of space-time castle. The space-time castle can be used as a temporary hiding place. Because of the special reasons for the materials used in its production, the space-time castle has the ability to evade ordinary attacks. In other words, the space-time castle is an energy space where there is a phantom. The outside world cannot physically interfere with it, but people can live inside it normally. The general technology is similar to the multiverse space, which is the same as the original Io ruins. In the same space and place, there may be people from 2 different worlds who do not interfere with each other but can coexist. It's just that the space-time castle can be controlled and carried around. It looks crystal clear from the outside, but it is completely different after entering. It's like coming to a real room. The first floor is the hall, and the second floor is 3 separate rooms, which are fully decorated and have a strong energy atmosphere, just like home. Li Ming was a little stunned when he looked around. He looked around and unknowingly came to the meteorite table in the hall on the first floor. Lan Jingzhang sat down skillfully first and clicked casually. The meteorite table in front of him hummed, as if a system was activated. The desktop flashed blue light, and the light was intertwined and woven, showing a picture. This picture is exactly the picture of the construction area outside. It can hide oneself and observe the outside, which is indeed convenient and practical. Li Ming looked at these and even wanted to have one himself. He nodded slightly and said, "Okay, now we just have to wait for the appearance of the Hades." At this time, the black fog in the building area outside had completely enveloped the building area and was still spreading. Next to a square building, an alien who had shot through the armor stopped, and the armor on the surface of his body made a squeaking sound, and then a click sound was heard, and the metal armor actually fell off from the surface of his body bit by bit. Like a slowly retreating cocoon, there was an alien girl inside the armor. This girl had a cold expression, a black and white dress, and her skin was somewhat similar to the one she looked down at, one white and one black, with murderous intent in her fierce eyes. She looked around and raised her left hand. A device on the wrist flashed, blue light interlaced back and forth, and a purple flame pattern appeared in the light. "Have you found the person?" A voice suddenly came from the purple flame. Julu frowned slightly, hesitated for a moment, shook his head gently, and then said, "Something unexpected happened here. I can't participate in the Light of Destruction plan." Purple Flame immediately showed dissatisfaction, and after a pause, he said, "Don't forget, although our Nuosu civilization and Jinro civilization have joined forces to deal with the Andromeda galaxy, but our goal is the water of the Milky Way." Julu nodded gently and said, "I understand that the people of the Lahu civilization are already on the Isle star." Purple Flame nodded again and said, "This is the best opportunity. Keep in touch." "Yes." After replying, the light on Julu's left hand gradually faded, and a pair of eyes looked coldly into the depths of the black fog. At this moment, on a spaceship several light years away from Ilma Star, an alien was sitting quietly in front of the operating table, looking at the operating table in front of him, with a look of satisfaction on his face. This person was the war demon Kingu. Looking at the operating table in front of him, Kingu said coldly, "What stage has the plan reached now?" A red figure appeared and disappeared in the operating table, and said, "The Nusu civilization has agreed to cooperate with us to jointly attack the Cheyenne starfield. The Triangulum galaxy will cooperate with the Geno civilization to attack the Andromeda galaxy. So, when we attack the Cheyenne starfield, the Andromeda galaxy will not be able to come to support. Now, all we need is the whereabouts of the Cheyenne water." Kingu's mouth curled up slightly and smiled. "It seems that it's time to activate my chess piece. If all goes well, we should know the whereabouts of the Cheyenne water now." The red shadow flashed slightly and said again, "We must get the exact location. We have only one chance." Kingu slowly stood up, his fierce eyes looking coldly into the distance, and said, "I have waited too long for this moment. Now, I'm really excited." On the Ilma Star, Li Ming closed his eyes and took a deep breath in a separate room of the space-time castle. At this moment, a device on his body suddenly beeped, and his eyes, which were originally slightly closed, slowly opened. He turned his left hand, and a metal ball appeared in his hand, flashing with light, and a message emerged, "Have you found the whereabouts of the water of the Sky River?" Seeing this message, Li Ming thought of the war demon Kingu, the person who had saved him. Li Ming did find the water of the Sky River, but whether to tell the other party, or how to tell the other party, made Li Ming look worried. Hiss. Taking a deep breath, Li Ming looked at the device in his hand and whispered, "I almost forgot Kingu." But, Li Ming hesitated for a long time about whether to tell Kingu this information, but finally raised his hand and typed 3 words, "Scorpio." The location of the water of the Sky River is indeed on Scorpio, which is also the most real information. Li Ming naturally has his own ideas about telling Kingu this information. First of all, Kingu was Li Ming's lifesaver, and Kingu had been looking for this information for many years. Even if he had not found the real whereabouts of Cheyenne water in all these years, he had confirmed that there was no Cheyenne water on many planets. If Li Ming made up a story at random, and a planet happened to be the one Kingu had found before, then Li Ming's lie would be self-defeating. Besides, Li Ming also wanted to repay his gratitude and put an end to this matter. Moreover, although Kingu was a war demon, he was also a member of the Andromeda galaxy. The Andromeda galaxy and the Cheyenne star region were dependent on each other, so it didn't matter, even if he knew about it. To put it another way, Kingu, a war demon, only had the strength of the second zone, and could not compete with Kwaji of the Cheyenne Guard. Considering these factors, Li Ming told the other party the location without any worries. After replying, Li Ming closed his eyes and continued to concentrate on resting. At this moment, the entire Camilla-free zone was completely covered by black fog. At the same time, the black fog passed through the barrier and continued to spread around, completely covering many places outside the construction area. There were strange figures flashing in the black fog. They were the alien insects. When the black fog in the insect nest reached a certain level, the alien insects would naturally appear, and they kept flying into the sky from the black fog. However, in the mountainous area farther away, another purple barrier had also formed. The purple barrier was not a sensory barrier, but a physical barrier. It covered a huge area and formed a sharp contrast with the red barrier. Chapter 488, The Dark Master Arrives. The strength of the purple barrier was extraordinary. Even the black fog could not penetrate it. It could only roll back, as if water had hit a wall. At this time, a figure was walking in the black fog. It was Cottrell. After walking a distance, he suddenly stopped and looked up at the sky. His eyes saw the purple barrier in the sky through the hazy black fog. His eyes immediately widened a little and whispered, "This barrier is it really going to stop everyone from leaving?" Looking at the purple barrier, the black smoke suddenly became thicker and thicker, and the sight gradually disappeared. Cottrell's face also darkened. At this time, this black fog area has appeared on the operating table of a spaceship in a blue light mode. The spaceship is quietly parked in the space of Irma. The Dark Warrior is standing in front of the operating table and talking about the black fog. The corners of his mouth are slightly raised, and he said, "This is it." As he said this, the Dark Warrior raised his hand and lightly tapped the operating table to confirm the transmission coordinates. The spaceship buzzed and disappeared on the spot. The light flashed, and a giant oval-shaped spaceship suddenly appeared in the sky above the Camilla-free zone. Compared with those spaceships that were already in the air, this spaceship was larger in size, and the surface was flashing with lights from time to time. The whole spaceship was like an air castle. The appearance of this spaceship naturally attracted the attention of all the people in the construction area. Among them, Bernard, who was sitting on the top floor of a building, looked at the sky from the window, but he just looked at it without saying a word, and his solemn expression was still calm. This building was relatively high and had exceeded the height of the black fog, but sometimes there were black flying alien insects flying past the window. The sturdy left arm slowly raised, and the armor on the helpless body suddenly flashed, and a blue dim screen emerged. Raising his arm in front of him, Bernard opened his mouth and said, "Can we start? Report your work." Bernard, a woman's voice came from the other side of the screen, and this female voice came from the oval spaceship in the sky. In addition to the Hades, there was another person standing in front of the oval spaceship control panel, and it was the Hades' deputy, Zhang Yuhan. On the console, Bernard's voice came immediately. "According to the information I have, there are 7 people here including me. The identities of those who are already known are Cuban of Lahu civilization, Julu of Nusu civilization, and Lanjing Zhang, and a guy from the Milky Way. In addition to these, Harding and Lanjing Zhang seem to have some unspeakable secrets." Bernard reported while sitting in the room. "What about the other person?" Zhang Yuhan asked immediately. Bernard looked at the black fog that was almost level with the floor, hesitated for a moment, and said, "I don't know the origin of that person." Zhang Yuhan paused after hearing this, glanced at the dark man beside him, and then continued, "Do you know their specific location now?" Bernard replied, "I can only find 2 people, and the others are not known for the time being." Zhang Yuhan took a breath with some displeasure and replied, "Continue to observe and wait for my news." "Okay." Bernard replied immediately. After hearing this, the face of the Hades suddenly turned gloomy, and the expression on his face kept changing. After glancing at Zhang Yuhan beside him, he said, "It seems that the situation is much more complicated than we thought." Zhang Yuhan was dressed in colorful clothes, and his eyes moved back and forth. Under his snow-white skin, his green eyes were particularly eye-catching. After thinking for a while, he said, "How about we catch that guy from the Milky Way first? After all, Li Ming is from the Milky Way. As for Harding's problem, let Castro solve it himself." The Hades was still thinking, and did not decide immediately. He looked at the operating table again and said, "This is basically the same as Castro's report." As he said this, the Hades' eyes gradually became cold, and he said, "You prepare the high-energy laser on the spacecraft, and Castro and I will go in. Wait for my order at any time." Zhang Yuhan was stunned when he heard this, and after hesitating for a while, he replied, "Yes." At this moment, the Hades' eyes were cold, and he turned and left. A moment later, a blue beam of light shot out from the bottom of the oval-shaped spaceship, and this beam of light immediately entered the black fog, as if a strong flashlight was shining into it. Accompanying the oval-shaped spaceship was another spaceship that had previously stopped in the air in this area. Its bottom also flashed with light, and a beam of light shone down. Then, 2 figures slowly descended from the beam of light. They were the Hades and Castro. Although the beam of light went straight into the black fog, the 2 did not enter it. After reaching the air above the black fog demon, they stopped. Castro's blue figure flashed and came to the side of the Hades first. After the Hades' eyes swept the black fog below, he said, "Then let's start with that guy from the Milky Way." As soon as the voice fell, Zhang Yuhan in the oval-shaped spaceship immediately pointed at the operating table and said, "Bernard, provide the coordinates." Bernard seemed to have heard the voice of the Hades just now. After a strange smile on his sinister face, he raised his right hand, and there was a black disc in his palm. The disc rotated rapidly, and a blue phantom appeared on the disc. The shadow began to search for something like a radar. Looking at this scene, Bernard opened his mouth to reveal his evil sharp teeth and said, "Just now in the prison, we have connected the devices of other people through the equipment. As long as their devices are still on them, the location will be exposed." As he spoke, a light spot suddenly appeared in the shadow pattern. When he saw the light spot on the radar, Barnard immediately smiled sinisterly and said, "Oh, I found it." Then he pointed at the shadow pattern with his left hand, and the coordinates were immediately transmitted to the spaceship. Zhang Yuhuan in front of the spaceship also confirmed the location. After receiving the information, the ghost turned his eyes and locked onto a place outside the construction area. Then he flashed and flew over. Castro followed closely behind. The direction the two were heading was close to the purple barrier, and under the black fog there, Cottrell was still walking slowly without noticing. While watching the purple barrier getting closer and closer to him, he said, "As long as we walk along the barrier, we should be able to find the loophole in the barrier." As he was speaking, Cottrell seemed to sense something, and his head suddenly turned, looking at the distance behind him in horror. At this moment, Barnard was still looking at the phantom pattern in the center of his palm, and another light spot flashed on the radar. The radar copied the map of the current environment in detail, and the location of the light spot could also accurately find the target. Looking at this flashing light spot, Barnard opened his mouth again and said, "This should be the location of the cool spot." As he said this, another light spot lit up on the radar map. This light spot was located at a tall building, and it was the appearance of this light spot that made Barnard look puzzled. His eyes widened a little, and he stared at the light spot intently. At the same time, the radar map also became larger. At this time, Barnard realized that the location of this light spot actually overlapped with his own location. Upon realizing this, Barnard's expression suddenly tensed up. Boom. A loud bang was heard, and the top of the tall building exploded directly, with gravel and dust flying everywhere. Barnard's figure had already escaped from the building, and came to the sky outside. He looked at his original location with his eyes. The entire floor had become a ruin, and the smoke and dust dissipated little by little in the breeze. A person was standing in the ruins. It was Julu, who was dressed in black and white. "It's not good to leak other people's information casually, Mr. Barnard." Julu stood straight in the ruins, looking coldly at Barnard in the air. Barnard's eyebrows jumped, and his mouth slowly opened. He said word by word, "Julu." As soon as he finished speaking, a small yellow and white figure suddenly appeared not far behind him. It was Cuban. "You are the one who leaked other people's information casually? Who do you think you are?" Cuban made an angry sound, and the mechanical arm on his left arm suddenly raised up. The left arm suddenly turned into a cannon barrel. Seeing this scene, Barnard dared not stay any longer. He gritted his teeth and flew into the black fog below. Cuban and Julu did not move and did not chase him. Cuban's left-hand barrel was aimed at Barnard's body. His eyes, like a lock, locked him after a few circular circles. "Sorry, you have been locked." As soon as Cuban finished speaking, there was a bang sound from the barrel, and a phantom cannonball flew out. Chapter 489, Li Ming's Value. The phantom shell was just an ordinary missile, formed by energy, and its speed was not very fast after it flew out. But when Barnard saw the shell, his face instantly turned ugly. He dared not stop for a moment, and used all his strength to speed up his flight. A black, slightly fat figure flashed. Barnard went directly into the black fog, and disappeared in the black fog. He looked back quickly, and thought he could breathe a sigh of relief, but he saw a light spot behind him, which was the missile. This made Barnard's expression tighten immediately, and he even accelerated his speed. Cuban, who was in the air above the black fog, looked at the distance with a smile on his face. He saw Barnard rushing out of the black fog from time to time, and sometimes going in, but no matter how he flew back and forth, he could not avoid the pursuit of the missile. Ha 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 ha. Cuban laughed at this scene, and was extremely excited. At this time, Julu, who was far away from him, also changed his expression and said, "Now is not the time to play." As soon as he finished speaking, Kuban's laughter stopped abruptly. He stared at Julu with wide eyes, then lowered his head in frustration, and looked at Barnard, who was still running away in the distance again, and even smiled a little. Kuban raised his left hand slightly, and lightly tapped his small finger. As if an order was issued, the missile in the distance suddenly trembled with a buzz. It was originally more than 10 meters away from Barnard, but the next moment, it came directly to Barnard's front. This made Barnard, who was running away, scream "Ah!" and stop suddenly. With his eyes wide open, he could see the light of the missile slowly getting stronger. Boom. A loud noise was heard, and the light energy covered the surrounding area of hundreds of meters like a steamed bun. The light was dazzling, the sound vibrated the eardrum, and the shock wave generated by the explosion spread all around. The black fog was blown away directly, and all the substances in the area turned into powder instantly. There was no trace of smoke and dust, but the amazing destructive power was terrifying. Even the ghost warriors near the purple barrier turned around and looked in that direction. They felt the strong wind blowing, and the cloak on their bodies fluttered slightly, and the black fog here also rolled up. But after just a glance, the ghost warrior turned around again. At this time, on the ground in front of the ghost warrior, Cottrell had been tied up tightly by a black metal bar, lying on the ground motionless. The ghost warrior glanced at Cottrell and said, "Take him away, I'll go over there and take a look." As soon as the voice fell, the ghost warrior flew up, rushed out of the black fog, and ran straight into the distance. At this time, looking into the distance, you can see that the explosion area and the surrounding black fog have dissipated, revealing only a huge deep pit. Staring with his eyes, his figure flashed and flew straight away. Castro in the black fog grabbed Cottrell on the ground and flew away. From the appearance of the Hades to the killing of Bernard, Li Ming saw everything clearly in the space-time castle, and the meteorite table was still showing the outside scene. These people have extraordinary abilities and methods, and they are all outstanding in the third interval, but Li Ming looked calm and natural, not caring much. Lang Jingzhang, who was sitting opposite Li Ming, turned his eyes and looked at Li Ming. Li Ming received the other party's gaze and naturally understood what he was thinking. He opened his mouth slightly and said, "Now is the time." As he said this, Li Ming turned his right hand and took out a metal ball, then gently tapped it with his left hand, only to see the blue light flashing. A message had been sent, and after doing all this, Li Ming closed the metal ball without saying anything. Lang Jingzhang saw all of Li Ming's behavior, but he just watched and said nothing. At this time, in the construction area outside, on the roof of a destroyed building, Julu's figure slowly flew to Kuban's side and said, "You should know about the change of plan." Kuban looked at Julu with disdain, snorted, and said, "It's really troublesome to cooperate with your Nusu civilization. Of course, I understand, to contain the Dark Warriors, so that the attack on the Cheyenne starfield will be smoother." Julu frowned when he heard this, looked at Kuban with some displeasure, and whispered, "Stupid, how can such a thing happen?" As the two were talking, a figure in the distance had slowly flown here. The person who came was the Dark Warrior. Kuban and Julu almost discovered the existence of the Dark Warrior at the same time, and turned to look. "Yo," he delivered it to the door himself. Kuban jumped on the spot excitedly and said. Julu seemed to hate the voice very much. After a disdainful glance, he said, "Our goal is to contain, not to fight. Do you understand?" Huh? Kuban had a question mark on his face. He looked at Julu beside him, then snapped his fingers and said, "Contain him, kill him, contain him, kill him." Seeing such a cooperative teammate, Julu could only sigh secretly, and said no more. When he was 100 meters away from the two, Mingshi stopped first, glanced around, and raised the corners of his mouth slightly. Just when he was about to do something, his brows suddenly frowned. Julu of the Nusu civilization actually stood with Kuban of the Lahu civilization. Whispering in his mouth, Mingshi had already started thinking about something in his mind. At this moment, another figure slowly floated over from a distance. This person was wearing a blue armor, and it was Castro. After a few flashes, Castro quickly came to the side of the Dark Master. Castro only glanced at Kuban and Julu on the opposite side, and looked at the Dark Master hurriedly, as if there was something urgent. Castro quickly took out a metal ball, and handed it to the Dark Master, saying, "I have the whereabouts of Li Ming, Lord Dark Master." The Dark Master was still thinking about the alliance between Kuban and Julu, but when he heard the news from Castro, his expression immediately brightened, and he took the metal ball in his hand, and looked at it carefully. In Lan Jingzhang's hands, the Dark Master said with a slightly ugly face, Castro nodded helplessly and replied, according to the content of the information, we must use Tanjing to exchange, otherwise we may never find Li Ming. The Dark Master took a deep breath, his eyes moved slightly, and after thinking for a while, he looked at Castro and said, you agree to Lang Jingzang first, and I will make a decision on the details of the exchange. While speaking, the Dark Master handed the metal ball in his hand to Castro again. As a result, Castro, who was holding the metal ball, also bowed and replied, yes. The unexpected news of Li Ming's sudden appearance made the Dark Master lose interest in the two people in front of him. After looking at the two coldly, he turned and went to the oval spaceship. The battle that was about to happen suddenly stopped at this moment, just because of Castro's sudden appearance, which made Julo and Kuban look at each other. They were puzzled. What does this Dark Master mean? Kuban looked at the Dark Master's figure in doubt, and whispered in confusion. Julo also couldn't understand it. After thinking about it, he still didn't know the reason. But after a moment, he still glanced at Kuban beside him and said, no matter what he means, our mission is to prevent this person from leaving the Irama star. The time for the Cheyenne Star region war is getting closer and closer. The Jino civilization has already begun to deploy the light of destruction. Our Nasu civilization and your Lahu civilization have already begun to sneak into the Andromeda galaxy. At this critical moment, you'd better listen to me. Chalu said coldly, and seemed to be extremely dissatisfied with this Kuban. Kuban also made an unhappy humming sound, but his face was helpless. As they said this, the two of them turned around and flew away from here. At this time, Li Ming, who was in the time and space castle, saw all this, frowned slightly, touched his chin, and looked at the meteorite table in front of him for a while, and then looked at Lang Jingzang. Lang Jingzang naturally knew what Li Ming was thinking, and said, it seems that the situation did not develop in the direction you expected. Li Ming also shook his head slightly in confusion. Judging from the situation just now, the Dark Master and Kuban Julu were already face to face. It can be said that the battle between the two was already at stake and ready to go. But at this time, the Dark Master suddenly left. This was unimaginable to Li Ming. Even if Castro conveyed the message he sent to the Dark Master, how could he have such great charm? Chapter 490, Extreme Potential. As Li Ming was thinking, a metal ball on the meteorite table in front of him suddenly burst, and a message appeared above it. They agreed. Looking at the message, Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly. He was neither very happy nor too disappointed, but relatively calm. Lang Jingzang was also very calm, as if he had expected it. At this time, Li Ming had realized that he seemed to be extremely important to the Underworld Master. Whether it was from the other party's sudden stop of the confrontation with Kuban Julu or the extremely quick agreement to this request, it was enough to prove it. However, Li Ming had no way back at this time. He could only wait for Tanjing to arrive and find a way to rescue her while getting away himself. Thinking in his mind, Li Ming's expression was tense, and he seemed a little nervous. Lang Jingzang also saw some clues. After a chuckle, he said, Li Ming, you have the ability of spiritual civilization and wisdom eyes. Do you know the relationship between the 6 domain star and the 6 civilizations? The other party's sudden question interrupted Li Ming's previous train of thought, but Li Ming was also very interested in this topic. He replied, each civilization corresponds to a different 6 domain star. I know this. Lang Jingzang nodded slightly and continued, then do you know how civilization combines with the 6 domain star? Combination? Li Ming frowned and looked puzzled. There was both surprise and confusion in his eyes. Lang Jingzang nodded slightly. After thinking for a while, Li Ming didn't know how to reply. After hesitating for a while, he smiled lightly and said, I have spiritual civilization and I have cultivated wisdom eyes. Both are in my body. Isn't this a combination? Li Ming smiled like this, and his body became relaxed and natural. He was no longer thinking about how to rescue Tanjing. Instead, he wanted to hear how Lang Jingzang interpreted the combination of this civilization and the 6 domain star. Lang Jingzang snorted, and when he saw Li Ming relax, he also laughed twice. After taking a deep breath, Lang Jingzang said, it seems that you haven't realized this point yet. After saying this, Lang Jingzang slowly stood up and said, the so-called combination is actually 2 points, one is potential, and the other is extreme. You should be very clear that there are still strong and weak civilizations of the same level. When a civilization achieves a perfect combination of its civilization heritage and star identity, it will discover its own potential and exert its ultimate star identity ability to become the best among the same level. Li Ming frowned when he heard this and couldn't help but whispered, potential. Extreme. In Li Ming's previous understanding, the difference between the strengths and weaknesses of civilizations of the same level was due to the differences in their civilization heritage and the different star identities they cultivated. But now that he heard what Lan Jingzhang said, Li Ming's understanding has changed. Simply put, both the Lagrazan and Tabitha people are power civilizations, but Tabitha people are stronger than Lagrazan. At this time, it can be said that Tabitha people's civilization development and star cultivation are higher than Lagrazan. However, if we put aside Lagrazan and only talk about Tabitha people, then those Tabitha people who look extremely powerful are also the best among many Tabitha people. They are all Tabitha people, the same civilization, and even the same star. Only a few people stand out. This is what Li Ming Lan Jingzhang meant. Lan Jingzhang continued, this is just an ordinary star. If it is replaced with a high-level star like the 6th domain Manxing, then the potential and extreme will become even greater, and how strong the strength can be depends on how much the owner can exert the potential and extreme, and this is almost unlimited. Li Ming took a deep breath and the expression on his face changed slightly. Li Ming had not really thought about this carefully, but after listening to Lan Jingzhang's words, Li Ming still fell into deep thought. Speaking of the cultivation of the star book, Li Ming had indeed cultivated a lot along the way, but it was almost impossible to reach the extreme and potential mentioned by Lan Jingzhang. In other words, Li Ming only cultivated and exerted according to the content of the star book. Although there was no enlightenment and perfect combination, Li Ming still relied on the 6th domain strengthening star book to reach a higher intensity of these abilities, but it was obvious that this was all relatively tough compared with those war gods and war demons. If Li Ming did not have the support of multiple civilizations in the 6th domain star book, he would naturally not be on the same level as those people. Knowing this, Li Ming seemed to have opened the door to a new world. Looking at Lan Jingzhang in front of him, he didn't know whether he was grateful or thankful. At this time, Lan Jingzhang returned to the meteorite table and said, whether you can activate your potential and use your abilities to the fullest depends on your talent, not on force. After saying this, Lan Jingzhang slowly sat down, raised his hand and gently tapped the table in front of him. The pattern on the meteorite table suddenly flashed, and the light began to rotate in a streamline. It was like a vortex suddenly appeared on the table. After a few seconds, a ball of light slowly rose from the center of the vortex. Lan Jingzhang looked at the ball of light and said, this is the key to this space-time castle. Only by injecting your information into it, you will be its master in the future. Li Ming paused after hearing this, looked at him with his eyes, and said, what does this mean? Lan Jingzhang smiled and said, the next rescue of Tanjing will inevitably be critical. Maybe we will have to rush to this space-time castle. It will be more convenient for you and me to master the ability to open the castle. Li Ming understood it, nodded slightly, raised his right hand gently, pointed at the sphere, and tapped it gently. A green light shot out from his fingertips, and entered the sphere and disappeared. The sphere suddenly flashed, and after a while of rotation, it suddenly flew towards Li Ming's palm, and disappeared into Li Ming's hand like a phantom. This object entered Li Ming's palm and body in the form of an energy body, which made Li Ming fully grasp the information of this space-time castle. Just like the ins and outs of a new thing, the method of use was known to Li Ming at once. Although Li Ming knew the manufacturing method of the space-time castle, he did not know the specific detailed functions of the space-time castle. After obtaining the key of the space-time castle, Li Ming suddenly understood it, and understood it completely. First of all, the origin of this space-time castle was not owned by Lan Jingzhang, but by others. It only fell into Lan Jingzhang's hands after several twists and turns. Of course, it was not accidental that this object could be used by Lan Jingzhang. It was the inheritance of Lan Jingzhang's race, and it only fell into his hands because of the genocide. The space-time castle was also built, based on multiple worlds, and the materials were scarce. Li Ming had never seen the materials, since he knew about the existence of this object. Although this space is safe, it is very fragile and has its weaknesses, which is a powerful spiritual exploration ability. People with this ability will discover this object through special abilities. Once attacked, it is also very easy to be destroyed. The space-time castle can be used by multiple people. In short, even if Li Ming and Lan Jingzhang are not together, they can enter this space at the same time. For example, one is in the Milky Way and the other is in the Andromeda Galaxy. The two can also meet in this space. It's just that the two people send each other through this space to reach each other's world. If Li Ming is in the Milky Way, it is impossible for Lan Jingzhang to reach the Milky Way through this space. Possibility and impossibility are not always absolute, but only the ability of objects. The current space-time castle is relatively low level and does not have such ability. But being able to meet here at different moments in time is also a very good thing. Of course, Li Ming does not know everything about the space-time castle now, but Li Ming is also full of curiosity about it. Now Li Ming does have the key to enter and exit this object at any time, but Li Ming's mind still has to return to the matter of rescuing Tanjing. It is probably because of Li Ming's help to Lan Jingzhang. Lan Jingzhang was able to hand over his cultivation heart and the castle of time and space to Li Ming with confidence. If Li Ming had not decided to help him, this unexpected gain would probably not have happened. He looked at the operating table and then at Lan Jingzhang. A plan for rescuing Tanjing had slowly emerged in Li Ming's mind. Chapter 491 Trading Plan. In the closed room, Li Ming sat cross-legged alone. Now that he knew the relationship between star and civilization, Li Ming naturally had to study it carefully. Reaching a higher realm was particularly important to Li Ming. Time passed slowly, and Li Ming had no distractions in his mind. Li Ming had already told Lan Jingzhang in detail about the plan to rescue Tanjing, and the implementation of the plan required the response of the underworld master. During this time, Li Ming naturally calmed down and felt the combination of star and civilization. This combination is an illusory existence. There is no certain method and rules. It needs to be understood by oneself, just like the enlightenment mentioned by Lan Jingzhang. Some people may be gifted and can quickly reach this realm, while others may never understand it. Li Ming can reach this point now, so he is naturally gifted. The time for cultivation passed in a hurry. I don't know how long I have stayed in the time and space castle. Li Ming has not made any progress in understanding the relationship between star and civilization, but after so long, Li Ming still has not received any news from the underworld master, which makes Li Ming a little worried. He stood up, left the room, and came to the hall outside. Lan Jingzhang was sitting in front of the meteorite table waiting. Just as Li Ming was about to go over to ask what was going on, the metal ball that was originally placed on the meteorite table suddenly lit up, flashing blue light, and a message emerged. Li Ming quickened his pace and came closer. He squinted his eyes and looked at the message, whispering, "It's finally here." As he said this, Li Ming looked up at Lan Jingzhang and said, "Let's start according to my plan." At this moment, above the construction area, a spaceship slowly lowered its altitude. This spaceship was a platform spaceship, just like an aircraft carrier. The top of the spaceship was a huge platform, but on the platform here, there were not other spaceships parked, but some armored soldiers and aircraft. The surface of the platform was several kilometers long and wide, and it was a huge mask. There was a soldier at every distance around the platform, and at one end, the Hades was quietly standing on a circular high platform. Behind the Hades were a large number of soldiers and mechanical equipment, some of which looked like robots, and some like giant weapons. And in the air directly above this platform was the elliptical spaceship, but the distance between the two was huge. There were several other large spaceships around the platform spaceship. The whole Inoop was like a space fleet, which was very impressive. The black fog below was still churning, and the number of alien insects had increased a lot. Flying alien insects kept coming out of it, and sometimes there were sharp insect sounds coming into the ears. But seeing the approach of the spaceship, these alien insects could only avoid it from a distance. After the spaceship flew slowly for a while, it finally stopped. The Dark Master looked at the distance on the high platform. His eyes turned, and he looked at Castro beside him and said, "Have you negotiated with him?" Castro bowed his head and said, "We have communicated, just waiting for the other party to appear." The Dark Master nodded with satisfaction and looked at the distance again. In the distant sky, a blue light flashed, and a figure suddenly broke through the air and flew over. When this figure appeared, everyone on the spaceship focused their attention on it. The blue light flashed, and the figures of Lan Jingzhang and Li Ming fell on the platform of the spaceship together. At this time, Li Ming was bound by a group of black chains and could not move at all. Lan Jingzhang looked around and stared at Mingxi. Mingxi also looked at Lan Jingzhang intently, and a smile slowly appeared on his lips, saying, "It's you, Lan Jingzhang. The remnant of Pork Star." Mingxi whispered disdainfully. Lan Jingzhang looked calm and ignored him. He stretched out his right hand horizontally and tightly grasped Li Ming beside him. Then, with a cold light flashing in his eyes, he said, "Where is Tanjing?" Mingxi was also very wordy and waved. A light flashed on the deck in front of the platform, and 3 figures appeared. The one in the middle was Tanjing, and the 2 soldiers on both sides. At this time, Tanjing looked haggard. His clothes were already tattered, and there was a lot of dirt on his clothes. His hair was very messy, and only the cloth band on his forehead was still intact. The whole person looked like a beggar wandering on the street. There were black spots on his 2 originally white legs. It was unknown whether they were wounds or rather dirt. His bare feet stepped on the ground. From this angle, Tanjing at this time had completely lost the charm of aerospace civilization and was decadent. But the other part, his delicate eyes and face, still made people feel pity. Judging from his determination to take revenge, Tanjing's civilization background was similar to Li Ming's Earth. This was not only the appearance of his demeanor, but also his emotions. These were also the 2 major categories of advanced civilizations. One was emotion and the other was life interests. Lan Jingzhang looked at Tanjing like this, and naturally felt distressed. He suddenly exerted force with his right hand, grasped Li Ming beside him, and then threw him hard. With a sound of pop, Li Ming was thrown out like an object, and fell to the ground in the distance. At this time, Li Ming struggled to stand up, looked at the dark man, looked back at Lan Jingzhang, and then walked towards the dark man. Seeing this, the underworld master nodded in satisfaction, and waved his hand again. At this time, the 2 soldiers pushed Tanjing out. At this time, Tanjing walked towards Lan Jingzhang, and Li Ming walked towards the underworld master. The 2 walked like this, and soon met each other. Tanjing's eyes turned slightly, and her steps paused. Her eyes looked straight at Li Ming. This familiar person made her think of the past, but she only paused, and Tanjing quickly walked towards Lan Jingzhang. Li Ming just slowed down. His expression did not change, but after Tanjing left, Li Ming still looked back, but what Li Ming saw was not Tanjing's back, nor Lan Jingzhang in the distance, but the sky farther away. After taking a look, Li Ming quickened his pace, and walked towards the underworld master. A moment later, Tanjing came to Lan Jingzhang's side, and Li Ming came to the underworld master's high platform. The 2 soldiers quickly stepped forward and grabbed Li Ming. Lan Jingzhang raised his right hand, and a white light flashed in his palm, as if a laser dagger directly cut the chains on Tanjing's body. At this time, the transaction between the 2 parties should have ended, but the next moment, a purple light suddenly flashed at the edge of the platform spaceship, and a light curtain rose along the edge of the platform. In just a blink of an eye, the purple light curtain enveloped the entire platform. It was as if a purple translucent gauze was buckled on the platform spaceship. Lan Jingzhang still had a calm face, looked at the purple barrier with his eyes, and whispered, "Barrier." Just as Lan Jingzhang said, this purple barrier is a physical barrier, the same as the barrier on the outer edge of the Camilla Free Zone, both of which are blocked from entering and leaving. The ghost man laughed at this time and said, "You 2 are remnants. This time, if you are captured, the Andromeda Galaxy will no longer have any worries. This is really killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Ha ha ha." Seeing this, Tanjing's expression changed drastically, and he looked at Lan Jingzhang beside him worriedly. Lan Jingzhang still had a natural demeanor and said, "Catch us. You're still thinking too much." Huh. The ghost master's face changed when he heard this. Lan Jingzhang suddenly stretched out his right hand and hugged Tanjing by the waist. Then his body surface suddenly twisted, and the original Lan Jingzhang turned into Li Ming. This sudden change made the ghost master's eyes widen a little, and immediately looked at the Li Ming in front of the high platform. Li Ming, who was bound in front of the high platform, suddenly had a white light on his body surface. Elemental clone self-destruct. Boom. The dazzling white light shot out, and the light was like a beam of light, piercing the bottom of the spacecraft. Before the eyes could see things clearly, a powerful shock wave came to the face, and the whole spacecraft exploded like a grenade. The flames shot up into the sky, and the fragments of the explosion flew hundreds of meters away. The whole sky was instantly engulfed by the flames, and in the fragments and flames, Li Ming hugged Tang Jing and flew out. The outer surface of Li Ming's body was covered with golden magic shields, like a golden sphere, and it flew 500 or 600 meters, before stopping on the top of a tall building. After putting Tang Jing down, Li Ming's eyes immediately looked at the explosion in the distance. His eyes turned and kept looking at the surrounding airspace. His face changed slightly, his brows wrinkled slightly, and his eyes showed doubt. Chapter 492, Overwhelming Advantage. According to Li Ming's plan, after he rescued Tang Jing, the Hades would definitely chase him. At this time, Lan Jingzang would cover the rear, and then the three of them would flee together, but Lan Jingzang was not seen at this time. The space-time castle is in your hands. Tang Jing. I'm also counting on you. As long as the Hades are alive, Tang Jing will never give up revenge. I'll do it for her. Li Ming. Please. A voice sounded in Li Ming's mind. It was Lan Jingzang's voice. At this time, Li Ming gritted his teeth angrily and said directly, "Damn it, do you think this is a movie plot? Leave a word and take on everything yourself. Gabby's story will not be repeated again." As he said this, Li Ming looked at Tang Jing beside him, waved his right hand, and all the golden magic shields on his body gathered on Tang Jing, and then said, "You find a place to hide first. I'll be back soon." As soon as the voice fell, Li Ming flew out and flew straight to the spaceship in the distance. At this moment, in the sky, the fragments of the spaceship explosion were ripping bit by bit. The burning flames made the spaceship seem to be only a frame, and the entire spaceship was slowly falling to the ground. At this time, the Dark Warrior had an angry look on his face, and his whole body was wrapped in a purple shield. His angry eyes looked around. "Is it just hide and seek, Lan Jingzang?" he said, but the Dark Warrior's eyes were cautiously watching the movements around him. After a few seconds, there was a sudden hum sound behind the Dark Warrior, and there was a sudden wriggling in the transparent air. A figure emerged little by little. It was Lan Jingzang. As soon as the figure appeared, he swung his right hand violently, and a black beast flew out. The Dark Warrior's eyes suddenly turned back, and his sharp eyes turned behind him, and he said sternly, "Here." As soon as the voice fell, he swung his right hand, and a short blade about 1 foot long was slashed out. Bang! After a sound, Lan Jingzang's dagger was directly blocked. With his eyes fixed on Lan Jingzang's position, the Dark Warrior's eyes flashed coldly. He snorted softly, and his body flashed. In just a moment, he came in front of Lan Jingzang, and the short blade in his hand stabbed straight into the Dark Warrior's abdomen. Dang! After a sound, the Dark Warrior's short blade and Lan Jingzang's dagger collided. The attack was so fast that Lan Jingzang didn't even react. With his eyes narrowed slightly, Lan Jingzang's figure retreated far away. The first time, Lan Jingzang whispered as he flew far away. The Dark Warrior looked at Lan Jingzang with a sinister look, snorted softly, and flew out again. Looking at the opponent's flying attack, Lan Jingzang's right hand tightly grasped the dagger, and his body flashed in a trance, and a black shadow flashed out from Lan Jingzang's body. This shadow looked exactly like Lan Jingzang, and as soon as it appeared, it went straight to the Dark Warrior. Seeing the shadow of Lan Jingzang appear, the Dark Warrior was also startled. He swung his right hand violently, and swung out the short blade again. This time, the short blade was not swung to slash, but thrown directly. The short blade flashed and pierced through Lan Jingzang's shadow, and went straight to Lan Jingzang behind him. Lan Jingzang turned sideways, and avoided the short blade. Although he dodged, the short blade turned, and stabbed Lan Jingzang again, like a boomerang. Lan Jingzang turned sideways again and still dodged it. The short blade returned along the original path, and pierced Lan Jingzang's shadow again. At this time, Lan Jingzang's shadow also stopped attacking, and after a flash, it was retracted into the body. The short blade returned to the hands of the Hades warrior, who held it in one hand, and held it horizontally in front of him. He raised his mouth slightly and said, "You are really cautious, Lan Jingzang. Lan Jingzhang looked at the dagger in the other's hand, frowned slightly, and held the dagger tightly in his hand, whispering, "If you are touched by that, Hades warrior, 3 times, your energy will be frozen. It has been touched once just now, and I only have one chance." The battle between the two was about to begin, and suddenly a violent boom sounded not far away. The damaged spaceship had fallen to the ground, and at the same time, a building in the black fog also collapsed due to some kind of impact. The two looked at the fallen spaceship, then looked at the collapsed building not far away, and finally looked at a person not far away, Li Ming. Li Ming glanced at the collapsed building below with disdain. Dust and smoke had spread, but Li Ming seemed to have no interest in it. He moved and ran straight over here. As soon as he saw Li Ming, the Dark Master showed a sinister smile, but as Li Ming approached, the smile gradually faded. At this time, Li Ming had already revealed his true form, and the strength of the 1.9 level civilization in the third interval was spreading even faster. "When did this guy reach this level?" the Dark Master said in astonishment. Li Ming had no choice but to do this. As far as the third interval was concerned, after reaching the 1.9 level civilization, he had to hide himself as much as possible, otherwise he would be exposed and attract the attention of the advanced civilization, which would be very dangerous at that time. But the current situation obviously did not allow Li Ming to think anymore. The Dark Master and Lan Jingzhang were only at the 1.8 level civilization, facing the top existence in the third interval. They certainly knew how powerful it was. When Lan Jingzhang saw Li Ming coming, he clenched his teeth and said, "I entrusted Tanjing to you, and you actually." Li Ming glanced at Lan Jingzhang, then looked at Mingxi and said, "Hatred is her heart not. It is not a question of who you entrust her to. I will be a good person today and reunite you. At the same time, I will also help you get revenge." At this point, Li Ming's figure had floated to the opposite side of Mingxi. He glanced at Mingxi, turned behind him, and said, "You should go and protect Tanjing. Leave this to me." After saying this, Li Ming looked at Mingxi again. The Dark Master also snorted and said, "It's useless to have only a 1.9 level civilization." Lan Jingzhang also said worriedly, "The Dark Master is a very rare wizard in the intelligent civilization, and..." Before Lan Jingzhang finished speaking, Li Ming raised his hand again to stop him and said, "You are only hindering me by staying here." As soon as he finished speaking, Li Ming's right hand had already clenched into a fist, and his figure slowly floated towards the Dark Master. Seeing that Li Ming insisted on doing so, Lan Jingzhang had no choice but to turn around and leave. Li Ming clearly sensed Lan Jingzhang's actions. After making sure that the other party had left, Li Ming smiled slightly and said, "I rarely compete with opponents with such overwhelming strength. As the first one, you are very lucky." Under the Dark Master's sinister face, his hand slowly raised up. In his left hand was a 1-foot long short blade, which was the dark blade he had just used to fight with Lan Jingzhang. In his right hand was a lamp floating. The lamp was surrounded by purple light, and the breath was strong and weird. Li Ming looked around, looked at the short blade, and then the lamp, smiled slightly, and said, "These two are 9th level floating dust weapons. It seems that you still have something." As soon as the voice fell, Li Ming's right hand slowly raised, and a green sprout appeared in his hand, which was the branch of the artifact Nirvana. The Dark Warrior frowned when he saw the green object in Li Ming's hand, but when he sensed the breath in it, he couldn't help but take a deep breath and thought to himself, "That breath, could it be?" Just thinking about this in his mind, Li Ming swung his right hand to his feet, and the action seemed to throw something to the ground. There was a flash of green light, and the green sprout shot down like a bullet, and fell into the black fog in a blink of an eye and disappeared. But the next moment, a series of whoosh 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 sounds were heard. One by one, thick vines flew out, and the scene was like the growth of all things. Anyone who saw this scene would be shocked. This is not growth, this is simply ascension. Like pillars supporting the sky, several spaceships in the sky were instantly entangled. It was as if Li Ming had summoned a primeval forest in an instant. People in it were like ants in the grass. It was green and tall, with no end in sight. The aliens in the entire area were surprised by this. Among them, Zhang Yuhan, who was in the oval spaceship, had a horrified expression on his face. Looking at the slightly trembling operating table in front of him, His face became uglier. On the surface, a thick giant vine was entangled with the spaceship, but if you look closely, you will find that small vines are constantly growing on the giant vine, and these small vines are spreading rapidly, as if they are going to wrap up the entire spaceship. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 493, Howl Monkey. The vines were still growing, completely covering the sky and the sun. Small vines continued to grow on the giant vines, spreading around like poisonous tongues in search of prey. The alien insects in the black fog naturally became the prey of the vines, but these alien insects seemed vulnerable. Cuban and Julu were also fleeing in the air at this time, because there were more and more small vines at this time, and it was not easy to escape. There were gaps of dozens of meters between the thick giant vines. Flying away from this place through the gap was naturally the fastest way, but small vines continued to grow on the giant vines, densely packed and endless. The ghost warrior waved his left and right hands at this moment and saw the ghost lamp and ghost blade constantly rotating around him, and the power of the two 9th level flowing dust weapons was also fully revealed at this time. The ghost blade was like a constantly rotating fan, and any vines that approached would be directly cut off by it, while the ghost lamp released a strange light, constantly interfering with the attack of the vines. This dark lamp is really strange. The purple light it releases can sometimes disperse the vines and sometimes control the vines to attack each other. I don't know what ability it has. Although these two 9th level flowing dust weapons are extraordinary, they can only be used for self-protection when facing artifacts. Struggling to shuttle through the gaps of the giant vines, but every step forward, only more vines will be encountered, like lines and spider webs, growing endlessly. At this time, you can only focus on the growing vines, and there is no time to release more powerful energy. The more powerful the energy release, the more time you need to prepare, even if it is only a few seconds. You may be entangled by the vines. Li Ming's figure slowly rose, looking at the endless vines in front of him, showing a satisfied look, and whispered, after the energy increases, the power of the nether vine can be exerted more powerfully. But obviously, this is not the true power of the artifact, but for now, it is enough to deal with these opponents. A pair of eyes turned and immediately locked a position, and the figure moved and flew over. Li Ming was watching the vines grow and feeling their attacks, but at the same time, another figure was watching all this from the roof of a tall building. This person was covered in hair, with a blue back and a white chest. His whole body was furry, his face looked a bit like hair, his ears were long and big, and he was not big. He sat on the roof without moving, and the vines around him did not dare to get close to his body. This person was also one of the 6 people imprisoned in the prison, but no one knew his identity. He was Howl Monkey, a 2nd level civilization. Howl Monkey looked at everything in front of him, without any action, with a calm expression, and whispered, "It's still very interesting that you can use the low-level abilities of the artifact." At the end, Howl Monkey smiled slightly. At this moment, Li Ming's figure passed through the vines, and came to a place where vines were densely packed. These tiny vines were only as thick as arms, intertwined between the giant vines, like dense lines. With the arrival of Li Ming, these vines retreated, as if they saw their master. The retreating vines were like dispersing dark clouds, peeling off layer by layer, and the things inside were revealed bit by bit. A large piece of vines faded away, and an alien tied up with flowers appeared in front of him. It was the Hades. Under the restraint of the vines, the Hades could not move at all, and even could not struggle. Li Ming looked at the other party with contempt, and slowly raised his right hand. Then 2 vines turned and floated in front of Li Ming. These 3 vines were like 2 arms, respectfully handed to Li Ming. One was wrapped with a Hades blade, and the other was wrapped with a Hades lamp. Looking at these 2 9th level flowing dust weapons, Li Ming smiled lightly, waved his right hand to take the things, and then looked at the Hades, and said, "Prepare to be judged, Mr. Hades." So saying, Li Ming turned and flew in another direction. As Li Ming moved, whether it was a giant vine or a small vine, they all spread out to both sides, as if making way. Not long after flying, a building appeared. Two people were standing on the roof. One was Lan Jingzhang and the other was Tanjing. The two were startled when they saw Li Ming, but Li Ming's body slightly turned to the side. At this time, another person appeared behind Li Ming. It was the Dark Master, but the Dark Master was firmly fixed by the vines. Li Ming smiled and said, "Tanjing, don't you want revenge? This person is left to you." After Li Ming finished speaking, he glanced at Tanjing. Just when he was about to say something else, there was a sudden buzzing sound in his head, which made Li Ming's eyes look in another direction. Li Ming's face was slightly nervous, but at this moment Tanjing just looked at the Dark Master angrily, and his hands were clenched into fists. Li Ming was still absent-minded, as if he had encountered something urgent. He turned around and flew away. Li Ming's sudden departure startled Lan Jingzhang, who frowned slightly and didn't know why, but his eyes kept looking at Li Ming's back until Li Ming disappeared in the vines. At this moment, Tanjing seemed not to notice Li Ming's departure. With a pair of bare feet, she took a slight step and walked towards the Dark Master. At this time, Li Ming kept moving forward in the vines, relying on the information he sensed to move forward little by little, as if he was looking for something. After walking a long way, Li Ming stopped. The figures of Cuban and Zulu appeared in front of Li Ming, but the two were also firmly fixed by the vines. He stared at the two people in front of him with his eyes fixed, shook his head slightly, and said to himself, "It's not these two guys." Having said that, Li Ming was ready to leave directly. As soon as he turned around, Li Ming stopped, turned his head slightly to the side, looked at the two again, and frowned tightly. Through the ability of wisdom, Li Ming discovered that there was a secret in the minds of these two people. Lahu civilization united with Nusu civilization, attack Cheyenne starfield. Kingu's plan. Kingu turned out to be Lahu civilization? Li Ming muttered to himself in his mind, and his face gradually became cold. Through his wisdom eyes, Li Ming found this information from the two people, which made Li Ming stunned for a moment. His eyes flashed coldly, full of anger. Being looked at by Li Ming like this, Cuban and Zulu looked at each other in horror. After taking a deep breath, Li Ming turned around and left. The Lahu civilization and the Cheyenne gods have long had disputes. This mysterious civilization is also the enemy of the Andromeda galaxy, but unexpectedly, the target of the Lahu civilization is the Cheyenne water. According to the information Li Ming just obtained, Kingu is also a Lahu civilization, which can explain why Kingu wants to know the whereabouts of Cheyenne water. And Li Ming just told Kingu the whereabouts of Cheyenne water. The more Li Ming thought about it, the more worried he became. He originally thought that Kingu's second interval would not threaten the Cheyenne gods or the Cheyenne water. Unexpectedly, the current facts made Li Ming regret it. The more Li Ming thought about it, the more worried he became. He paused and stopped where he was, muttering to himself, "No, we must inform the Cheyenne gods about this as soon as possible." Thinking of this, Li Ming had already made a decision with a serious expression. But just when Li Ming was about to do something, his head buzzed again, as if something suddenly entered his brain. The strong feeling made Li Ming even a little dizzy. With Li Ming's strong mental power, it was almost impossible for anyone to affect Li Ming's mind. He shook his head and slowly opened his eyes, only to see an alien floating in front of him. This person was Hal Monkey. Li Ming also recognized the other party at a glance, and couldn't help whispering, "It's him." Hal Monkey smiled at Li Ming, just floating in the air motionless. Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly, and after just a glance, his eyes suddenly widened a little, and his brows frowned. With his wisdom eyes, Li Ming could not see any information from the other party's brain, nor could he sense the other party's level of civilization. "Who are you?" Li Ming asked. Hal Monkey spread his hands, hesitated for a moment, and opened his mouth slightly. It seemed that his lips were moving and speaking, but no sound could be heard. Despite this, a large amount of information poured into Li Ming's brain. There was no conversation, but he could instantly transmit what he wanted to say to the other person's brain. Li Ming had never come into contact with this strange ability, but at this time Li Ming just quietly felt the information, as if he was reading something. Chapter 494, The Best in This Galaxy Group, Cheyenne Mu Organization. Hulmunchi, a second-level civilization, a higher-level civilization guide, is responsible for guiding the 1.9-level civilization of this galaxy group. This is basic information, but it is also the information that Li Ming least wants to see. After seeing this, Li Ming has no intention of reading it. He smiled slightly and whispered, "I just used energy, and I was targeted." As soon as the voice fell, Li Ming's smiling face suddenly turned cold, and then with a hum, Li Ming's figure disappeared on the spot. When Li Ming appeared again, he was already dozens of kilometers away, and he just used the ability of teleportation. After his body stabilized, Li Ming hurriedly looked around. After making sure that he did not see Hulmunchi's figure, the cloak behind him suddenly fluttered and turned into a pair of snow-white wings. After flapping quickly, he flew away from here. Li Ming, who has the flowing cloud wings, flies very fast, leaving the Camilla free zone and heading far away. There is also a construction area on the Irama star, which is the real Irama star control area, the military base of Andromeda, and the control center of the Irama critical point. At this time, whether Li Ming wanted to get rid of Hulmunchi or reach the Cheyenne star region, he needed a spaceship, and this was Li Ming's only choice. In a moment, Li Ming's eyes had seen a construction area, and his eyes turned and quickly locked onto the spaceship's parking place. Li Ming's spaceship was also parked here before. After determining the location, the wings behind him flashed quickly, and his figure flashed. When he arrived at the parking area, facing many parked spaceships, Li Ming found his spaceship at a glance. He moved his figure and flew over to the side of the spaceship. He raised his right hand and tapped the spaceship lightly. Suddenly, a blue light flashed and a vortex portal appeared. After Li Ming looked around, he stood up and entered it. Just after Li Ming entered, a small blue meatball flashed and came to the front of the portal, flipping and entering it. After a few seconds, the spaceship hummed and trembled slightly and disappeared from the spot with a whoosh. When the spaceship appeared again, it was already in the space of Irama star. Li Ming looked at the operating table, raised his hand, and tapped it lightly to determine his destination. A planet on the console lit up, and a route had been planned. This spaceship was exactly what Li Ming flew out of the Cheyenne star region. At this time, he returned by the same route. It could be said that he was familiar with the route. In order to quickly reach the Cheyenne star region, Li Ming's mental power also entered the console. After all, it was no small matter for the Lahu civilization and the Nusu civilization to attack the Cheyenne star region. At this moment, a giant flying object had quietly arrived at the central system of the Andromeda galaxy. This object was not a spaceship, but a dozen kilometers long and wide. It was a huge thing, a few points larger than some meteorites, and it was controlled by an underground base on a black planet. In the base, a huge blue phantom image was showing the location of the spaceship, and two aliens were standing in front of the phantom image. One was Wasa, and the other was a woman with golden hair and an eye, but this eye was different. The entire pressure was a silver one, like a silver metal bar blocking the eye. The high-collared cape wrapped his body in it, and two slender black claws tapped back and forth in the void, just like fingers tapping on a keyboard. This person was Mikati, the mechanic of the Geno civilization. "How long will it take to detonate the light of destruction?" Wasa said anxiously. Mikati only focused on tapping the phantom, looking at the huge flying object in the image, and said, "Any time." Hearing these four words, Wasa's mouth corners slightly raised with a satisfied smile, and said, "Then let's start. Nakaran has already prepared it." Mikati then stopped the operation in his hands, pushed his glasses with one finger, smiled slightly, and said, "The fireworks show will start now." As he spoke, he raised his finger again, and pointed at the phantom, and saw a blue halo ripple out from the phantom. And the huge object that was originally flying suddenly shone brightly, and a loud bang sounded, and the entire flying object was instantly engulfed by the light it released. The light turned into light waves, and began to spread rapidly around. The speed of this spread was beyond imagination, and beyond the cognition of low-level civilizations, because the speed of this light exceeded the ordinary speed of light. The most important thing is that this light has a strong penetrating ability. As soon as it exploded, it spread throughout the Andromeda galaxy, but this light is not continuous light, just like a layer of water waves spreading around. The light of destruction here has been activated, and Li Ming is still moving at full speed in the spacecraft, but there is still a long distance from Irema to Scorpio. It will take time to arrive, and it is useless to be anxious. Look at you. It seems that you are in a hurry to go there. A very sudden voice came from behind. Li Ming was originally concentrating on controlling the spacecraft. Hearing this voice, he was stunned and turned his body slowly. He saw Hal Monkey sitting comfortably in the seat of the main cabin and looking here. Li Ming's face changed several times, and he turned pale in an instant, and the whole person froze in place. When did this guy come in? I actually didn't notice it at all. Li Ming's heart was already turbulent at this time, and he even said to himself in fear, Halmonshi said naturally, what do you think about what I told you on the Irema star? Li Ming said cautiously, after I deal with the current matter, I will reply to you. Halmonshi paused after hearing this, with a thoughtful look on his face. After hesitating for a while, he replied, okay, then I'll wait for your reply. Li Ming was immediately surprised by the other party's answer, and even showed doubts in his eyes and frowned. His heart was in turmoil, and could not calm down. According to what Lan Jingzhang said at the beginning, if he was targeted by the second level civilization, Li Ming would have to face a choice, either give up the advancement, or be killed by the other party. Why didn't this second level civilization in front of him mention this matter? What does this guy mean? Li Ming couldn't figure it out for a while, and kept asking himself in his heart. Thinking of the other party's purpose, Li Ming suddenly remembered that when he was on the Irema star, the other party did send a message to Li Ming's brain, but Li Ming did not read it completely at that time. Now he thought that this content seemed to contain the answer Li Ming wanted. While looking at the other party carefully, the consciousness in his brain had begun to savor the message. Rereading the content of this message, the expression on Li Ming's face changed slightly. The content of this message showed that Halmonshi came from the Cheyenne-Mu organization. The organization currently has 13 members and is the highest organization in this galaxy group. Cheyenne-Mu was born in this galaxy group and was born with a purpose, which is to prevent low-level civilizations from advancing to high-level civilizations. This purpose comes from the inner world of all members, just like humans need to eat, drink water, and live. It is an inevitable behavior for civilization to arrive here. If this behavior is described more accurately, it is like some customs in different places in the human world, which are passed down by the older generation, or like some behavioral habits of indigenous peoples. You can't understand it, but it has been passed down, and this is the Cheyenne-Mu organization. Of course, the work of the Cheyenne-Mu organization is not simple. In addition to preventing the advancement of low-level civilizations, they also have to hunt down those who have secretly advanced to the second-level civilization. In short, the existence of this organization is to allow all life in this galaxy group to survive and develop according to the original rules, and no life is allowed to leave this galaxy group through advancement. The reason why Hal Monkey did not kill Li Ming and did not prevent Li Ming from advancing is because the current Cheyenne-Mu organization needs to recruit 2 members, and Li Ming is the one who was chosen. At this time, Li Ming can choose to agree or refuse, but both will bring serious consequences. If agreed, Li Ming must leave Hal Monkey, accept the Cheyenne-Mu baptism, erase his previous memories, and become a new member of the Cheyenne-Mu organization. If refused, Li Ming may be killed directly. This is the main content of the message. In addition, the Cheyenne-Mu organization controls many non-advanced 1.9 level civilizations, which plays a huge role in the organization's control. Simply put, the supreme ruler of the Andromeda galaxy is the Queen. If the Queen submits to the Cheyenne-Mu organization and is a non-advanced 1.9 level civilization, then the Queen will inevitably prevent the civilization in the galaxy from entering the 1.9 level civilization. This will be more conducive to the Queen's absolute rule and power, and it will also help the Cheyenne-Mu organization to kill its target in the cradle. Chapter 495, The Power of the Light of Destruction. Even if some people sneak into the 1.9 level civilization, they will still be targeted by the Cheyenne-Mu organization and dealt with. As far as Li Ming is concerned, he still needs to think carefully about the decision and handle it carefully. Li Ming was flustered. After receiving this information, he looked uncertain and at a loss. Don't be nervous. You are busy. I will wait for your reply. Hao Mengqi said calmly. How could he not be nervous? Because the two options Hao Mengqi proposed were not what Li Ming was willing to accept. To join the Xianmu organization, he needed to erase his previous memories. If he did not join, Li Ming would most likely be killed. With this in mind, he turned his body a little bit and faced the meteorite table again. At this time, the other party had no intention of taking action. Li Ming did not have to worry about it all the time. He just had to be more careful. But just as Li Ming was about to continue operating the spacecraft, the entire spacecraft suddenly went dark with a hum, as if there was a power outage, but after just a flash, all the light was restored again. But the sudden blackness just now made Li Ming frown, not knowing why. He quickly turned around and looked at Hao Mengqi, who was also confused at this time, not knowing what had happened. But when Li Ming looked at the console again, there was no other displayed information except for the faint blue light. The safety coordinates and transmission routes disappeared, and even the information about the current location of the spacecraft disappeared. It was as if the entire spacecraft system was paralyzed. What's going on? Li Ming looked at the console, raised his right hand and lightly tapped it, injecting his consciousness into it. All the information of the spacecraft disappeared. Li Ming opened his eyes wide in astonishment, frowning slightly. The system of the current spacecraft was like being formatted, and all the information disappeared. At this time, the spacecraft only had the ability to fly manually and transmit manually, but in the vast universe, without this system, it was almost impossible to complete the flight manually. Unable to figure out the reason, Li Ming turned around and suddenly looked at Hao Mengqi. At this time, Hao Meng looked thoughtful. After hesitating for a while, he said, the spacecraft should have been hit by a cosmic ray just now, so it temporarily lost all its capabilities. It will recover on its own after a while. I just don't know whether this cosmic ray is naturally generated by the universe or artificially emitted. Hao Meng continued. Li Ming's expression did not change. But at least it can be confirmed that the current situation of the spacecraft should have nothing to do with Hao Meng. But what is this cosmic ray? Li Ming couldn't figure it out for a while, and he had no idea in his heart. Without the safe coordinates, the spacecraft can only stay still, and even though Li Ming is extremely anxious, he can only hope that the spacecraft's capabilities can be restored earlier. With a slight sigh in his heart, Li Ming slowly sat down in front of the operating table. At this moment, the entire Andromeda galaxy has been caught in the flames of war. After the light of destruction, all equipment has completely failed. Whether it is the spacecraft or the technological equipment on the planet, they are all in a static period at this moment. It seems that time has stopped. At this time, on Scorpio, Ji was sitting cross-legged on the top of the mountain. He raised his head slightly and looked at the starry sky. At this moment, all the barriers on Scorpio began to disappear, just like lights went out. What is this? Ji frowned in confusion. As the barriers disappeared, two spaceships slowly flew into the planet. These two spaceships were not made of metal, but biotechnology, like two huge beetles. When he saw the two spaceships, Ji frowned slightly and slowly stood up. Could it be? Looking at the two spaceships in the sky, Ji's expression gradually became solemn. This scene was not only on Scorpio, but also in the Changsheng galaxy. The Changsheng galaxy is the headquarters of the Xian Guard, and a large number of spaceships are approaching at this moment. At this moment, Li Ming and Hao Mengqi sat opposite each other, and everything was quiet in the main cabin. Hao Mengqi leaned back in his chair, looking at Li Ming with his eyes, and said, "We can't go anywhere now. Why don't you think about it, and make a quick decision?" Li Ming rolled his eyes, and glanced at the other party. As the saying goes, he is most afraid of the air suddenly being quiet. At this time, Li Ming was also very worried, but he still heard the other party's question. He didn't answer immediately, but just looked at the other party quietly, thinking in his mind. Hao Mengqi looked at Li Ming's expression and gradually became a little unhappy. He said, "Why? Is this difficult?" Li Ming still looked hesitant, and finally replied, "What if I refuse to join the Xianmu organization?" Refuse? Hao Mengqi's face suddenly became solemn, but when he saw Li Ming, he took a breath with a hiss, snorted, and said, "Refusal is just your current idea. When I take you to the Cheyenne organization and accept the Cheyenne baptism, everything will be fine at that time. You will forget the past, forget everything, and start over. Many aliens hope so. You are my careful choice. Hal Menke continued. Li Ming frowned slightly and said, no matter what I choose, I shouldn't have much time now. I'll make a decision after I finish the things on hand. Hal Monga nodded gently and said with a smile, okay, but I'll be frank with you. I'm inviting you in a nice way now. If your answer is something I don't want at that time, then we won't be talking like this now. Li Ming narrowed his eyes and said nothing, but the meaning of the other party's words was very clear. Li Ming was not very clear about how strong the second level civilization was and how big the gap in strength was. However, from the perspective of Li Ming's 9th level civilization and the 1st level civilization, the gap was still quite terrifying. In Li Ming's heart, it was impossible for him to agree to delete the other party's memory, and Li Ming would not choose a non-advanced civilization. After all, Li Ming's goal was the highest civilization, and now Li Ming thought that he had to think of a way out. Just thinking about this, Li Ming frowned and suddenly thought of something, and his eyes suddenly looked at the operating table. He stood up and came to the operating table. He stretched out his right hand and lightly tapped it. A green light shot into it. At this time, the operating table flashed with light, and a safe coordinate appeared. Li Ming had been operating the spacecraft personally before the spacecraft system was paralyzed. In Li Ming's memory, he had an impression of the location of the safe coordinate, but he didn't remember it when he saw Hal Menke just now. Now that his mind was stable, Li Ming remembered it. Relying on his memory, Li Ming began to continue to transmit with his consciousness and headed straight for Scorpio according to the previous route. Hal Menke looked at Li Ming's operation. His expression did not change, but his eyes changed slightly, and a strange smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He operated the spacecraft manually and began to shuttle in the universe. The safe coordinates were completely based on memory points. Li Ming's operation was extraordinary because the flight and transmission of the spacecraft were systematic. Before the system collapsed, it might be done with just one button. But without the system, all operations of the spacecraft require multiple people to complete, and for Li Ming, who has a strong mental power, he can operate it alone, and it is more perfect and accurate. After a while of teleportation, the coordinates of Scorpio have emerged, but the position at this time is not displayed on the operating table, but in Li Ming's consciousness. Hal Menke, who is on the spaceship, only feels that the spaceship is teleporting and moving quickly, and has no idea how Li Ming did it. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and the spaceship emerged in the space of Scorpio. At this time, Li Ming slowly stood up. On a screen on the wall of the spaceship, he could already observe the entire Scorpio in real time. Li Ming turned his head to the side, looked at the screen with his eyes, and his figure was stunned, and his face instantly became ugly. Scorpio has long lost its original charm. All barriers have completely disappeared, and flames are everywhere, as if the entire planet is on fire. It is so unrecognizable that Li Ming also frowned. It is obvious that this planet is facing war. I don't know how Kwuji is now. Whispering in his mouth, the spaceship has begun to move and approach the planet. Chapter 496. Get out. Boom. A huge figure was blown away from a distance and crashed into a mountain. The whole mountain collapsed, and Kwuji fell to the ground in the middle of the ruins. This time, I really can't continue to protect the water of the Cheyenne River. The armor on his body was already in tatters, and many places had exposed his flesh, and the flesh was already broken and bleeding. In the air in the distance, 3 figures were flying towards Kwuji, and one of them was Lanbo. As for the other 2, one was Kingu and the other was Hong Benzu Yang of the Nusu civilization. Hong Benzu Yang was the true leader of the Nusu civilization, a 1.8 level civilization. His body and head were wrapped in armor. He held a red longsword in his hand and had an extraordinary momentum. The 3 of them approached Kwuji little by little, but at this moment, a spaceship suddenly approached the area, which made the 3 of them pause. The spaceship came to Kwuji's body and stopped, and then 2 figures quickly jumped down from under the spaceship, and even the blue transmission ladder did not appear. Pop. With a soft sound, Li Ming and Hal Meng's feet landed one after another. When they saw Li Ming and Ho Meng, the three people on the opposite side were also stunned, with puzzled expressions on their faces, and occasionally looked at each other. Li Ming almost didn't even look at the three people on the opposite side, and he lifted Guoji up from the ground. With a flip of his left hand, a ball of green light flew out from his palm. The green light was like a green ghost, and rotated around Guoji's body, helping him to recover. Even though Guoji was injured, he still had an unyielding look on his face and said, "This little injury is nothing. Brother Li Ming, don't worry about me." Li Ming could only secretly admire Guoji's tough guy image, but there was no expression on his face. Although he was already seriously injured, he still looked like he could fight again, just like the sacrifice at that time. The Cheyenne guards seemed to be such strong people who swore to defend their duties to the death. Seeing the green light begin to heal Guoji's wounds, Li Ming turned his head and looked at the three people on the opposite side and slowly stood up. He took a step forward and came to Guoji. He glanced at Hal Monkey beside him and said, "Do me a favor and take care of him for me first." Hal Monkey sat down lazily and said, "Okay." Hearing these two words, Li Ming stared at the three people opposite him. Seeing Li Ming again, Kingu narrowed his eyes slightly, looked at Li Ming and Hal Monkey, smiled gently, and said, "Li Ming, are you here to stop me? The secret of Cheyenne water on this Scorpio was told to me by you?" Guoji paused, frowned slightly, and turned his eyes to look at Li Ming. At this moment, Li Ming did not respond. He clenched his hands tightly, and his figure flew out with a whoosh, and his eyes narrowed directly towards Kingu. Before his body approached the other party, his right fist was already wrapped in a dazzling white light and hit Kingu directly. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and Lion Bo's huge figure suddenly blocked Kingu's body, crossing his arms and firmly blocking Li Ming's punch with his red armor. The shock wave generated by the collision spread out from between Li Ming's fist and the red armor, blowing around like a strong wind, and even the rocks and trees below were slightly swaying and affected. At this time, Lian Bo pushed hard with both arms, and a rebound force was immediately released. Li Ming turned over and retreated, and did not stop until he was dozens of meters away. "Hey, are you in such a hurry to do it? After all, I'm your savior. Even your savior can be directly attacked. Then, your relationship with Gabby is also." Kingu then laughed in a low voice. Li Ming did not respond to this, but just stood still, and his eyes could not help but glance in the direction of Guoji. Obviously, these words formed many questions in Guoji's mind, and Guoji seemed to have a different opinion of Li Ming. At this time, Kingu's figure floated forward slowly again, with a cold expression, and said, "We are all advanced civilizations, and we know each other's meaning of life. Only energy is the master of everything. Don't talk about that despicable feeling. After all, you are just talking. Aren't you still focusing on your own interests at the critical moment?" As he said this, his eyes looked at Li Ming again and said, "You want to kill your savior as soon as you meet. How should this behavior be handled in your emotional world? Humph, ridiculous." Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly, raised the corners of his mouth slightly, with a half smile, and said, "On Sprague, you saved my life, otherwise I would not be here today, but you saved me just to let me help you calm down the incident of Gabby's death and find the water of the Milky Way. I have already told you the whereabouts of the water of the Milky Way. I call it repaying a favor. At the transaction level, the purpose of your saving me has been achieved. There is no relationship between you and me now." Li Ming replied. Yo. Kingu rolled his eyes in disdain and said, "You said it as if I had never saved you in just a few words. Really?" Without waiting for the other party to continue, Li Ming's anger in his heart could no longer be suppressed. He gritted his teeth and said, "Fuck you." As soon as he said that, Li Ming's figure suddenly flew out. Seeing this, Lion Bo blocked Kingu again. Kingu showed satisfaction after seeing the angry Li Ming and the strange Guoji. He glanced at Hangbing Suiyang beside him and said, "Guoji, I'll leave it to you." Hangbing Suiyang then looked at Guoji's position, and his figure flashed and disappeared on the spot. Li Ming only had Kingu in his eyes at this moment. Just as his figure flew over, he suddenly disappeared with a whoosh. It was like a magic trick that suddenly disappeared. Instant light. The two words came into Kingu's ears. Li Ming was already behind him, and Bing Pin's right hand was already on his shoulder. The speed of this teleportation was so fast and amazing that Kingu only saw that Li Ming, who was flying towards him, had disappeared. The next moment, her shoulder suddenly tightened, and a hand had already pinched her shoulder. Lionbo only then reacted and turned around in a hurry. Li Ming did not kill him directly. He turned around and kicked out, hitting Lionbo's head, just like kicking a football. Snap. The force of this kick was extraordinary, as if the whole leg would glow. Lionbo's figure shot out and there was no room for struggle. Li Ming still held Kingu's shoulder with one hand. His eyes were extremely cold. Kingu immediately showed fear when he looked at Li Ming, and his whole body trembled slightly. Li Ming, I'm your savior, Kingu said hurriedly. Li Ming nodded and replied, that was in the past. As soon as the voice fell, his right hand suddenly clenched hard, and a crackling sounded, as if the bones inside were crushed. A roar of pain followed. Kingu gnashed his teeth, injured, and shouted. Li Ming looked at him coldly and whispered, for the sake of that favor, I will let you go quickly. As soon as the voice fell, Li Ming's palm holding Kingu's shoulder suddenly flashed green light. A second later, under Kingu's complicated expression, a muffled bang sounded, and green vines grew out of his flesh. It was as if Kingu was a seed, and the growing vines were like sprouts. The vines continued to grow and wriggle, and finally wrapped Kingu up little by little. Watching Kingu gradually disappear under the dense vines, Li Ming's mood was still a little complicated. His palm slowly loosened, and the Kingu in front of him had disappeared, leaving only the vines that continued to entangle. With his eyes slightly closed, Li Ming took a deep breath, and Kingu wrapped in vines fell straight to the ground. At this time, Lionbo, who was far away, witnessed this scene. His face changed, and the look he gave Li Ming was very different from before. He was actually a little afraid. Li Ming still stood there, looking at the gradually falling of the bones. His eyes narrowed slightly. At this time, Hang Bingsuiang had come to Guoji's side, and the red blade in his hand flashed, and he was about to take action, but his eyes couldn't help but look at Hou Mengqi beside Guoji. Hou Mengqi just sat beside Guoji motionless, as if Hang Bingsuiang had not come. Hang Bingsuiang glanced at Hou Mengqi again and said coldly, you don't want to intervene in this matter, do you? Hou Mengqi looked up at the other party and ignored him. Hang Bingsuiang snorted, looked at Guoji again, and clenched the red blade in his right hand tightly. Just as he was about to take action, another figure suddenly flashed in. It was Li Ming. Coming to Guoji's side, Li Ming looked at Hang Bingsuiang coldly and said, get lost. Hang Bingsuiang was startled when he heard this, and then he looked back. He saw that there was no trace of Kingu, except Lionbo in the distance. What's going on? Even if this guy is a 1.9 level civilization, he shouldn't be. The Cheyenne water is about to be obtained, but at this time, Hang Bingsuiang seemed to still have illusions about the Cheyenne water, but this idea was instantly seen through by Li Ming. However, Li Ming ignored him and turned his eyes to Hou Mengqi, saying, send these two guys away. I will reply to you after I finish the last thing. Hou Mengqi stood up and looked at Hang Bingsuiang again. At the same time, the breath on his body suddenly turned, and the energy of the second level civilization was released at once. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, as if a shock wave entered the chest of everyone around, and their hearts beat slightly. Li Ming pulled Guoji up, looked at him and said, let's go, I want to talk to you alone. Having said that, Li Ming turned around and left. Guoji was still calm, and looked at Hou Mengqi beside him, but he also left. The breath of the second level civilization, no matter who it is, will produce endless fear, as long as they sense it. Hang Bingsuiang was trembling slightly on the spot, and beads of sweat kept flowing down his forehead. He didn't think about the water of the Cheyenne River in his heart, but just wanted to leave this place quickly. Hou Mengqi didn't seem to have a planet to kill the other party, but just said casually, leave Scorpio, kid. Hang Bingsuiang was stunned on the spot, and his body suddenly turned and flew away. While flying, he glanced back from time to time, fearing that the other party would regret it. Chapter 497 I want to try. Night. The dark light enveloped Scorpio again. Li Ming and Guoji sat together on the rock in front of Gabba's tomb. Not far behind them, Hou Mengqi sat motionless on another rock. At this time, the barrier of Scorpio had been restored and everything returned to nature, but the wounds left by the war on the planet could no longer be integrated. How is the Changsheng galaxy? Li Ming looked at Ikuji and asked first. Ikuji looked calmly at the mountains in the distance and said, the Lahu civilization and the Nusu civilization are rushing to the Cheyenne water. The battle over there is just a diversion. Li Ming nodded slowly and was relieved. Ikuji smiled lightly and said, war is inevitable. Even if you don't tell the secret of the Cheyenne water in Scorpio, the war will continue, and it may be more tragic than it is now. Li Ming paused after hearing this, but he understood it. After concentrating his eyes, he smiled lightly and shook his head slightly. Li Ming understood Ikuji's judgment very well. The Light of Destruction plan would not be terminated for any reason, and the Light of Destruction plan was an opportunity for both the Lahu civilization and the Nusu civilization. Even if Li Ming did not reveal the secret of the water of the Sky River, the war would indeed continue. As for the more tragic situation, it might be because there was no specific whereabouts of the water of the Sky River, and a larger and more crazy attack would be launched. What's wrong with this guy? Ikuji looked at Almonchi in the distance behind him, and then asked. Li Ming's eyes also looked over. His face did not change. He smiled lightly and said, the choice of fate. Ikuji's eyes changed slightly, but he immediately understood the meaning. He turned his eyes and looked at the endless starry sky and said, a higher level of civilization? That is a place that every life is curious about and yearns for. But some people have come and gone freely in the place you yearn for. Li Ming paused after hearing this and looked at Ikuji. Ikuji continued to look at the starry sky and said, we are like a group of lives that live under the rules of others. Once you try to jump out of these rules, you will face the choice of life and death. 90% of people will choose to leave their home planet after reaching a higher level civilization that surpasses their peers. And 100% of the home planets will always accept you to come back at any time. Ikuji continued. Li Ming listened very seriously, and his mind began to reverberate. Ikuji suddenly retracted his gaze, looked at Li Ming, and smiled. Some people break into your world just to teach you a lesson, and then turn around and leave. As for whether you can learn anything, it depends on your own choice. Gabby is suitable for wandering, just like his personality, not bound by the rules of high-level civilizations. You are a person with aspirations, and you will not stop here, but the road ahead is even more bumpy, and you seem not ready yet. Ikuji continued. Li Ming still listened carefully, but did not reply, just smiled slightly. Under the night sky, a spaceship left Scorpio. Ikuji watched the spaceship leave alone until the spaceship completely disappeared from his sight. Leaving Scorpio, the spacecraft flew to the depths of the universe, while in the main cabin, Li Ming and Holmungchi sat quietly with each other. Now, it's time to tell me your decision. Holmungchi looked at Li Ming coldly with a solemn expression. Li Ming was calm, smiled slightly, hesitated for a moment, and replied, I will continue to advance to a higher civilization. This is my choice. Holmungchi originally thought that Li Ming's answer would satisfy him, but as soon as these words came out, Holmungchi's face suddenly became gloomy, and he said, sure enough, my companionship and good advice over the past few days still didn't make you make the right decision. Well, everything, let's end here. As soon as the voice fell, Holmungchi's body suddenly glowed. A layer of white shield wrapped around his body, and his right hand stretched out to grab Li Ming. Since Li Ming made such an answer, he naturally knew what the result would be. For Li Ming, his pursuit would not change, even if he encountered such an irresistible force. With a wave of his right hand, a blue beam of light formed in the palm of his hand, and he went straight up to face Holmung's palm. Bang! The powerful energy collided and turned into shock waves and scattered. Then, with a loud boom, the spaceship in the vacuum suddenly broke and exploded, turning into pieces. Li Ming and Holmung were also instantly bounced away by this force. Staring at each other with eyes, his teeth clenched tightly together, whispering, the result that will inevitably be faced. I have never fought so hard. As he spoke, the surface of Li Ming's body flashed with golden light, and the Hingyan Shang behind him turned into wings. Holmung's figure suddenly appeared in the exploding spaceship fragments, staring at Li Ming with a sharp face, and flying towards him. Fighting in the vacuum consumes a lot of energy, mainly life, because this is different from being on the planet. Life still needs the natural environment of the planet to support it. Once it reaches the vacuum, it needs more energy to protect the body. Looking at Li Ming who was coming, Li Ming also went up to him, and the two collided and emitted a dazzling light. Bang, bang, bang. The sound continued to occur as the two people collided, and the energy shock wave also spread out in circles with the collision, as if two spheres were colliding. The strength of the second level civilization is naturally self-evident. Li Ming naturally did not use all his strength. In Li Ming's view, he only needed to use a little means to kill Li Ming, but he did not expect that Li Ming's energy was also extremely strong, not an ordinary 1.9 level civilization. And Li Ming went all out to deal with it, and he was just able to cope with it. After a few rounds, Li Ming and Li Ming retreated from each other after the energy collision, looking at each other indifferently. Li Ming frowned slightly, smiled slightly, and said, "It is indeed different from the ordinary 1.9 level civilization, but since I want to end you, it will be an irreversible situation." As he spoke, Li Ming's right hand slowly raised up, and white light flashed in the palm of his hand, and an energy ball was already gathering and forming. Li Ming looked at the other party's actions, his eyes suddenly widened a little, his eyeballs turned for a while, and turned into a cornered shape, and then he raised his right hand, and began to condense energy. On the way forward, there will inevitably be setbacks, I still want to give it a try. Li Ming then replied. With 3 times the energy of an ordinary 1.9 level civilization, against a second level civilization, and Li Ming possessing a 6 domain enhanced star status, now was the moment to show his limit. Chapter 498, Spacetime Blue Hole. The two of them continued to gather energy, and transform the energy in their bodies into elemental energy, that could be used for attack. For Li Ming, this was dignity. He could not let a 1.9 level civilization struggle in front of him for one more second. For Li Ming, this was a life and death battle. Li Ming had no choice but to defeat the other party. The energy balls in the hands of the two people grew larger and larger, like an inflated balloon. Looking at the energy condensed by Li Ming, Li Ming did not dare to neglect it at all. While condensing the energy, he solemnly said, "I will use half of my energy to show my respect for you, kid." Li Ming seemed not to hear it, but just concentrated on condensing energy. The strengthening of the 6 domain enhanced star, plus the support of Wukong's ability, plus 3 times the energy of an ordinary 1.9 level civilization, made Li Ming's light energy extremely powerful. But to reach the strength of a second level civilization, it was naturally unlikely. But at this time, Li Ming's mind flashed with an idea, and suddenly thought of something. Looking up at the energy he had condensed, his eyes sank slightly, and he thought to himself, "It is indeed like this." At this moment, Li Ming remembered the 2 words that Lan Jingzhang had said, potential and extreme. Only by achieving a perfect combination of one's own civilization can one show power, but it is obviously not possible at the moment. The 6 domain enhanced star plus Wukong plus 3 times the energy are like 3 pieces of a puzzle, forcibly spliced into a weapon. Although it is powerful, it is only for the same level. When facing a second level civilization, this power is obviously still a little insufficient. It's a pity that Li Ming met Lan Jingzhang too late, otherwise he could have more time to practice the so-called combination. Now everything is too late, but I still want to try. Come on. Second level civilization. Li Ming suddenly shouted, and swung his right hand violently to throw out the energy ball in his hand. Li Ming was also startled, and swung his right hand to throw out the energy ball. Like 2 shining suns, they collided with each other in an instant. Both of them have the ability of intelligent civilization, and are also light energy. The only difference is the nature and volume of energy. But there was a sharp pain in the brain, and the eyes turned pale instantly. Even the consciousness protected by the wisdom eye suddenly came to his attention at this time. There was no violent noise, only the strong light that was continuously released. The light pierced through the body. Even the closed eyes could not resist it. In front of this light, Li Ming seemed to be air, transparent, and even non-existent. He was directly penetrated by these rays. Not only Li Ming, but also Li Ming had the same feeling. Li Ming's ability had far exceeded Li Ming's expectations. Even the white shield on the surface of the body could not resist this light at all. It was directly penetrated. This guy is so. Hulmonga whispered in his only consciousness, but after a few seconds, Hulmonga suddenly shouted "Ah!" and his consciousness disappeared. After the strong light was released for a few seconds, it suddenly began to shrink and generated a strong suction force. Just like a star will turn into a black hole after its energy is burned out, the collision of the two energies also strangely produces suction at this time. Li Ming and Hulmonga were sucked into it in just an instant, but there was no black hole formed here, but a blue hole was formed. In just a blink of an eye, the white light disappeared with the attack and Hulmonga. The only thing that appeared in the original place was a blue sphere, the blue hole. The blue hole has a diameter of 100 meters and no longer produces suction. It is like a natural planet, but it is composed of pure energy, just like the structure of a star. Blue holes and stars have another thing in common, that is, they release energy, and they release it continuously. Unlike stars, the energy released by blue holes is not light, but natural energy, and as the energy is released, its volume is also shrinking little by little, but the speed is very slow. Although it is only 100 meters in diameter, its lifespan is still very long. Just like other energy celestial bodies in the universe, it is generated and then disappears as time goes by. In the vast universe, a blue planet is slowly moving, and in the space of this planet, a dark red vortex suddenly appears. The vortex was like a hole suddenly appeared in the vacuum of the universe, as if the vacuum was torn open. As soon as a vortex appeared, two figures were thrown out, just like two ants being thrown out, and the two people went straight to the blue planet. At this time, the two people were like two meteorites passing by the blue planet, falling rapidly under the gravity of the planet. The blue planet is similar to the Earth. 70% of it is ocean, and only 30% is unevenly distributed land. Li Ming's body passed through the atmosphere and went straight to the ground, and so did Hulmonga. The distance between the two people was getting bigger and bigger, like a pair of meteors. The flesh seemed to be on fire under the friction of the atmosphere. From their perspective, the land gradually became clear and was magnified little by little. The two people were like two meteors. One went straight to the blue sea, and the other flew to the land. In the night sky, only a flash of fire was seen, and with a dull sound of plop, Li Ming's body fell directly into a lake and reached the bottom of the lake without stopping. The same phenomenon also occurred in the vast ocean. Hulmonga also entered it and went straight into the dark seabed and disappeared. Under the moonlight, the lake water occasionally reflected light, and the slightly rippling water surface reflected the faint light like the scales of a fish. Occasionally, birds and insects were heard around, like a melody that matched the scene on the lake. After a while, white mist rose from the lake little by little, like water vapor, but this mist was relatively dense, and it only took a moment to cover the entire lake. As the mist spread, a figure gradually floated up from the bottom of the lake until he left the water and came into the air. This person was Li Ming, but Li Ming was still in a coma at this time, with only a faint consciousness in his brain. The white mist supported Li Ming like a cloud, and at the same time, the mist began to grow upon Li Ming's body and finally took out a star bag. It was like a palm condensed from the mist, holding the star bag and pointing it at Li Ming. Blue light flashed, and blue rays shot out from the star bag, and then a flowing cloud pill appeared in the blue light. Then, the white mist formed a palm, grabbed the flowing cloud pill, and put it into Li Ming's mouth. After this action, Li Ming's closed eyes suddenly jumped slightly, and then slowly opened. He was awake. After the battle with Hulmonga, Li Ming's energy was almost exhausted. In addition, the strange time and space blue hole shuttle, if there is no energy supply, Li Ming's nebula is likely to be broken. Li Ming's body was still a little weak after waking up again, and he needed the flowing cloud pill to slowly restore his body. He looked at the white mist with his eyes and whispered, "Fortunately, you are here, Zuolang." Zuolang did not respond, and carried Li Ming to the shore of the lake, and then slowly put Li Ming down. Sitting cross-legged on the ground, Li Ming did not move and began to recover his body. His mind was also thinking about what happened before. According to Li Ming's existing memories, the scenes of arriving here are almost one-sided and blurred. The clearest scenes in his mind are still when he fought with Hulmonga. Li Ming used all his strength and hit with all his strength. All his energy has been exerted to the limit. After colliding with Halmanki's energy ball, his consciousness was affected. The subsequent memories have been intermittent because of the influence of consciousness. But through the intermittent intervals of the pictures, Li Ming has roughly guessed some. It must be that the energy collision under the vacuum has produced a crack in the universe, and then it was teleported here. Li Ming thought so in his heart, and another question formed in his mind. If it is a transmission of space cracks, what kind would it be? After all, if the cracks cannot be found, it may not be possible to teleport back. Li Ming whispered to himself, and there was a burst of worry in his mind. Li Ming did not know much about space cracks. He only knew that this was a natural transmission mechanism, just like black holes, white holes, grey holes, etc. The possible transmission here includes different worlds, multiple worlds, parallel worlds, etc. And Li Ming did not understand what kind of place he was in for the time being. Chapter 499 Parallel World. After taking several Liuan pills in succession, Li Ming's body also recovered greatly. After putting the turbidity back into Hengan Shang, Li Ming still closed his eyes and stayed where he was. Before he knew it, it was already night. The morning sun shone all over the land, as if awakening all the life here. The sun shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves onto Li Ming's face, and a warmth appeared on the skin exposed to the sun. Li Ming slowly opened his eyes. His body had fully recovered, but his consciousness still had some defects. This defect was something Li Ming could not change, because it was caused by the transmission of the space crack and was irreversible. Fortunately, this defective consciousness would not really cause any damage, and it would slowly recover in the future. Standing up from the ground, Li Ming looked around and flew up, directly into the sky. With a casual look of his eyes, he could see the surrounding environment, and Li Ming's mental induction also spread out with a hum, like an invisible barrier suddenly dispersing. Everything within tens of kilometers nearby was enveloped by Li Ming's consciousness. The vegetation in the jungle, the vehicles on the road, the humans in the city, each one was extremely clear, and there was no trace of Halmanki, but Li Ming found a trace of abnormality. Human. A pair of eyes immediately looked into the distance. With his eyes, Li Ming seemed to see the tall buildings in the city in the distance. Could this be Earth? Whispering in his mouth, Li Ming's expression was even more excited, and his face showed surprise, but after thinking about it again, Li Ming immediately shook his head and said, "Impossible, the space crack will not be transmitted in the same time and space." Then here, Li Ming thought in his mind, and his body moved, and flew to the location of the city. In a flash, Li Ming had arrived above the city. This city was the same as the city that Li Ming had seen on Earth before, with tall buildings, people coming and going, and vehicles and people passing by on the road. According to Li Ming's previous memory, the city on Earth used to look like this, but this was completely different from Li Ming's cognition. Looking with his eyes, Li Ming's body moved and went straight to the ground. Coming to a remote street, Li Ming began to look around. There were few people here, just a suburb. Walking slowly along the street, sometimes you could see people riding trams passing by, and occasionally there would be cars passing by. Every scene was extremely familiar, as if I had really returned to the Earth of the past. It was still the scene in my memory, and time had not changed at all, but it made people feel familiar and strange. Just as Li Ming was watching like this, a car suddenly drove over from a distance. The car drove slowly along the roadside and finally stopped. Li Ming looked at the other party with his eyes, then walked over quietly. Just a sense, the situation inside the car entered his mind. When he noticed the situation inside, Li Ming's face suddenly changed, and he even showed a look of surprise. Ah! A painful cry was heard, and then two men got out of the car and left quickly. Li Ming quickly approached, and came to the door. The person lying on the steering wheel was dead, and his body was covered with blood, but when he saw that face, Li Ming opened his eyes wide. The face of this dead person was exactly the same as Li Ming's. "This is me." Li Ming's body froze on the spot, and his eyes looked at the two people who had already escaped. Li Ming did not chase, but continued to look at the dead person in front of him. After standing there blankly for a long time, Li Ming's rustic expression relaxed, as if he had thought of something. Parallel universe. Li Ming said these 4 words with some surprise. Li Ming did not know much about parallel universes. Even at the current level of civilization, he knew very little. What he knew was that the parallel universe was one of the multiverses, that is, there might be multiple selves in other universes. This is also one of the abilities of space cracks to transmit. Among all the uncertain factors, this possibility naturally exists. Looking at the dead self in front of him, Li Ming's expression changed slightly, and his right hand gently reached into the car window, and placed his palm on the head of the person in the car. Before the other party's consciousness energy completely disappeared, Li Ming used his mental power to completely absorb that consciousness into his brain. So, this is a parallel universe, Li Ming said in surprise. But after checking the consciousness he had just acquired, Li Ming's face immediately became ugly again. His face sank slightly and he said, "How could I, in this universe, be so miserable?" As he spoke, Li Ming couldn't stop sighing. After standing there for a while, a white light flashed in his right hand and shot out with a whoosh. The white light was the energy of Li Ming. Once the powerful energy touched the person in the car, it was like a flame igniting a piece of paper. The person in the car turned into ashes and debris bit by bit and disappeared in the air. Not only did the person disappear, but even the blood stains in the car disappeared. Li Ming's energy was to decompose all the tissues that were completely related to this person. After doing this, Li Ming opened the car door, bent over and sat in the car. Then the clothes on his body twisted and changed, and the clothes and cloak turned into the same appearance as the person who just died. Because Li Ming's body was the same as the other person, there was no need to change, so only the clothes were changed. After doing this, Li Ming started the car, turned around and left. While driving, the information gradually emerged in Li Ming's mind. The Li Ming in this universe is also called Li Ming, with the same name, but in a different world. This Li Ming is a doctor, but he is not doing his job properly, and his medical skills are not good. He also illegally wrestles medicines, and various banned drugs are also in his transactions. These drugs are not well-known finished drugs, but chemical agents. Simply put, once this kind of thing falls into the hands of bad people, the consequences are disastrous. It is because of this kind of transaction that Li Ming fell into crisis. He was assassinated just now. In addition, Li Ming still has 3 girlfriends. Upon seeing this, Li Ming in the car slapped the steering wheel hard and whispered, "My god, I have 3 girlfriends in this parallel universe. But what's the use? After all, I'm still a short-lived ghost." Li Ming continued to sigh, snorted, and whispered again, "Let me take care of your funeral, Li Ming." As he spoke, the car driven by Li Ming made a sharp turn into another street and began to drive towards the city center. At this moment, deep in the sea, Monkey's eyes slowly opened. It was pitch black in front of him, and he was crawling with creatures on the seabed, including crabs and some microorganisms. They might have mistaken Monkey for the corpse of some creature. Monkey, who woke up, didn't care about it. He stood up, and the energy in his body dispersed a little bit, and all the creatures on his body were dispelled by the energy. Monkey stood up straight, slowly floating up from the bottom of the sea, and the surrounding sea water also churned. As his body rose, the surrounding sea water gradually formed a huge vortex, and Monkey was the center of the vortex. His body gradually came to the surface of the sea, leaving the sea water and coming into the air. He looked around with his eyes, and there was nothing else except the endless sea water. As he was watching, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. Monkey quickly hugged his head with his hands and uttered a low and painful sound of "ah" from his mouth. What are the sequelae of time travel? There is confusion in consciousness, Monkey whispered. After taking a few deep breaths, he looked around again and said, "It must be the collision of 2 energies in a vacuum that induced the space-time vortex. If this is the case, then the world here should be a parallel world," Monkey whispered, frowning. At this time, the dark red vortex in the outer space of the water ball was gradually shrinking. This vortex was the hole that Li Ming and Monkey passed through, and it was also formed by the collision of the 2 energies in a vacuum. The dark red vortex corresponds to the blue hole in another space-time universe. The universe where the blue hole is located is where the 2 fought at first. Like the dark red vortex, the blue hole is also constantly releasing energy and gradually shrinking. Chapter 500, Past Regrets. At this level, Hao Meng's knowledge of parallel universes is naturally higher than Li Ming's, but despite this, Hao Meng is still full of worries. The energy in my body is seriously consumed. I'm afraid I can't fly away from this planet directly. If I continue to stay here without energy replenishment, it will be troublesome. The most important thing is that the oxygen here is still corroding the flesh. Hao Meng showed a worried look. Hao Meng is not Li Ming. He has endless energy and many pills. After the previous battle and the shuttle through the time and space blue hole, Li Ming's energy has been exhausted. It was with the help of Zhuo Long that he took Liu Iron Pill for emergency life-saving. Hao Meng is relatively better because the energy volume of the second level civilization itself is higher than Li Ming. Although a lot of energy is consumed, it can still wake himself up after a coma, which is beyond Li Ming's reach. But this also encountered another problem, that is, the endurance problem. If there is no energy replenishment, Hao Meng is also very likely to die here. Thinking of this, Hao Meng could only sigh slightly and fly away. At this moment, Li Ming has driven his car into the bustling area of the city. There are many vehicles here, and it is very congested. Li Ming can only slow down. The memories of Li Ming in the parallel universe emerged in Li Ming's mind bit by bit. Among the 3 girlfriends, one has married Li Ming, and this person is also the one Li Ming loves the most. As for the other 2, there are other reasons. In addition to these 3 people, the other people who contacted him also have some relationship with his drug transactions. Processing these complex information in his mind, Li Ming's car has already entered a community. After skillfully parking the car in the parking space, he opened the door and got out. He looked at the tall building in front of him and walked in directly. According to memory, this is where Li Ming's first girlfriend lives. This girlfriend is also the only one among the 3 who knows about Li Ming's illegal transactions. When he came to the elevator entrance, a man and a woman were waiting for the elevator. The man was about 27 or 28 years old, wearing glasses, holding a bag, and a watch on his wrist. He looked like a local tyrant. The woman wore a white short-sleeved top and shorts on the bottom. She was dressed ordinary, but she looked pretty and natural. Li Ming just glanced at the 2 casually and immediately frowned. He stared at the girl straight in his eyes, took a deep breath, and looked solemn. Meng Lian ie. Li Ming was shocked. The girl's appearance was exactly the same as Meng Lian ie that Li Ming met on Earth, but now she looked only in her early 20s. Through his wisdom eyes, Li Ming discovered that the girl's name on this planet was also Meng Lian ie. The girl, who had been watched by Li Ming, suddenly glanced at Li Ming and turned her head to the side. The boy also looked at Li Ming, then looked at him fiercely and said, "What are you looking at?" Li Ming smiled and ignored him. At this time, the elevator door opened. Li Ming entered, and the man and woman also entered immediately. The boy held the girl, looked at Li Ming coldly, and pressed the 15th floor, which happened to be the floor where Li Ming lived. Looking at the boy with his eyes, Li Ming shook his head slightly and said, "Meng Lian ie, this boy is not worthy of you." The girl was startled by her name being called suddenly, and turned back to look at Li Ming. The boy next to her was also stunned. He looked at Li Ming, and then at Meng Lian ie, and asked, "Who is this person?" Meng Lian ie shook her head repeatedly and said, "I don't know him." The man at this time showed displeasure on his face. He looked at Meng Lian ie coldly and said, "How can he know your name if he doesn't know him?" Having said this, the man looked at Li Ming fiercely and said, "Who are you? What do you mean I'm not worthy of him? Are you worthy of him?" Li Ming looked at Meng Lian ie with a calm expression and smiled. "The me before may be a little worse, but it's different now. Be my girlfriend." Li Ming said to Meng Lian ie frankly and directly. Meng Lian Ie's eyes widened when he heard this, and she hid slightly behind the man in black, whispering, "This man is sick, I don't know him." The man had a fierce expression, stepped forward and grabbed Li Ming's collar, and the elevator door just opened at this time. Seeing this, the man pulled Li Ming out with force, and scolded fiercely, "Get out." But no matter how hard the other party tried, he only pulled Li Ming's clothes, and Li Ming's body did not move at all. It was like pulling a fixed stone pillar, and there was no movement at all. Li Ming glanced at Meng Lian ie and said, "You go out first." Meng Lianai looked at the posture of the two people and could only walk out of the elevator quickly, but as soon as he walked out, the elevator door closed automatically, but the elevator did not go up or down, but just stopped in place. Only 1 second later, the elevator door opened automatically again. Li Ming adjusted his collar and walked out slowly, and the man had fallen to the ground, and then the elevator door closed again and went down. Meng Lianai looked at Li Ming in horror and stepped back slightly. Li Ming smiled at the other party and said, "Wait for me here. I'll go take care of something and come back soon." After saying that, Li Ming turned around and walked along the corridor. When he came to the door of a room, Li Ming reached out to grab the door handle, but his mental consciousness had already sensed something, and his brows frowned slightly. Under Li Ming's consciousness, the door lock had changed slightly, as if the lock had opened automatically. Without any sound, Li Ming pulled it lightly, and the door opened. The whole process was very quiet, with almost no sound. Just as Li Ming was about to enter, a figure suddenly flashed in the corridor behind him. Meng Lianai actually followed quietly and stopped a few meters away from Li Ming. At this time, Meng Lianai was holding a mobile phone in her hand and staring at Li Ming blankly, but the signal on the mobile phone was zero. After hesitating for a while, Meng Lianai said, "The elevator seems to be broken." Li Ming smiled slightly. Brick looked at Meng Lianai, then entered the room and closed the door again. There were 2 packed suitcases in the living room, and the sound of packing was still coming from the bedroom. Li Ming came to the sofa in the living room and sat down slowly, saying, "Where are you going?" The sound in the bedroom stopped immediately, and a woman with long hair and red clothes came out. When she saw Li Ming, she was immediately startled and shouted softly, You, why are you back?" The woman said in astonishment, with a puzzled and unbelievable expression on her face. Li Ming snorted lightly, sighed slightly, and said, "I came back to wipe my ass." As soon as the voice fell, Li Ming's right hand moved lightly, and the woman's body suddenly tensed up. Her heart stopped, and her body functions disappeared. The energy in her body seemed to be drained in an instant, and all the active cells stopped instantly. With a light thump, the woman finally lost consciousness. After doing all this, Li Ming got up and walked out. When he came to the door and opened it, Meng Lianai was gone. But in Li Ming's ears, he heard the sound of da-da-da hurried footsteps, as if someone was going downstairs quickly, which was naturally within Li Ming's consciousness. The elevator and mobile phone signals were all controlled by Li Ming. Meng Lianai wanted to escape quickly from the stairs at this time. Li Ming smiled slightly and came to the elevator in trance. The elevator door opened automatically, and Li Ming entered. He did not press any buttons in the elevator, but the elevator had already started to go down by itself. When the elevator door opened, Li Ming walked out. This was not the first floor. Li Ming turned around and came to the staircase, quietly looking at the stairs above. The footsteps became clearer at this moment. Meng Lianai went downstairs quickly. As soon as she came to the staircase, she immediately exclaimed, "Ah!" Her feet slipped, and her body was about to fall on the steps. But at the moment, when her body was about to fall, suddenly an arm stretched out and helped Meng Lianai up by the waist. "Be careful, why are you in such a hurry?" Li Ming gently helped Meng Lianai up and said gently. At this moment, Meng Lianai was trembling, her face was pale, and she was so scared that she couldn't say a word. Li Ming smiled and said, "Let's go." He held the other's shoulder with one hand and walked down. Although Meng Lianai was extremely panicked at this time, she didn't dare to resist at all and could only obey Li Ming's wishes. Back to the elevator in trance. The elevator door opened automatically. Li Ming smiled slightly and carried Meng Lianai into it. After entering the elevator started to run again and went down. At this time, Meng Lianai's eyes turned and her face turned pale because she didn't see Li Ming do anything, but the elevator was still running automatically. After arriving at the first floor, the elevator door opened and Li Ming held Meng Lianai and walked out. Just when they arrived in front of the building, more than a dozen figures had appeared in the parking lot outside. The leader was the man in black. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.